When the boardroom screens turned blood red and $20 million failure flashed across every monitor, nobody expected the man in the second-hand blazer to speak. Evan Cole had been invisible for months. The warehouse worker pretending to be an engineer, the single father nobody took seriously. But silence had cost too much. Now, with careers burning and a billion-dollar contract dying, he had one choice: stay quiet and watch everything collapse, or risk everything to tell the truth about the company's golden boy. Some doors slam shut, others explode open. If you're ready to discover what happens when the invisible man finally speaks, stay until the end. And hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The fluorescent lights in the Astron consulting lobby hummed with the particular frequency of expensive real estate. Evan Cole sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than his monthly rent, trying not to think about how the receptionist had looked at his resume, that quick flicker of pity before the professional smile locked into place. 23 minutes late. The interview was supposed to start at 2 o'clock, and now it was 2:23, and Evan could feel each minute like a physical weight. He'd left his daughter Mia with Mrs. Chen 3 hours early, paid for the extra time he couldn't afford, taken 2 buses across the city because his car had died last month, and the repair estimate might as well have been a ransom note. The blazer he wore had come from Goodwill. He'd tried it on in the store's fluorescent glare, standing between racks of other people's discarded lives, and told himself it looked professional enough. Now, surrounded by men in suits that probably cost what he made in a month, he felt like an actor who'd wandered onto the wrong stage. "Mr. Cole?" A woman in her 30s appeared, tablet in hand, expression neutral in that particular way that service professionals perfect. "They're ready for you now." Evan stood, smoothing down the blazer that wouldn't quite stay smooth, and followed her through glass doors into a corridor that smelled like expensive coffee and quiet ambition. His work boots, cleaned 3 times last night until his hands ached, squeaked slightly on the polished floor. The woman didn't look back. The interview room was all windows and minimalism. 3 people sat behind a table that looked carved from a single piece of wood. A gray-haired man in wire-rimmed glasses who radiated board member authority, a younger woman with sharp eyes and sharper suit, and a man in his early 40s whose casual confidence suggested he could end Evan's hopes with a bored glance. "Mr. Cole." The gray-haired man, Peterson, according to the research Evan had done at the public library, gestured to a chair across from them. "Thank you for coming. I'm Richard Peterson, VP of Operations. This is Sarah Chen, HR Director, and Lucas Brandt, our lead technical consultant." Evan shook each extended hand, aware of how his calloused palm must feel against their soft grips. "Thank you for the opportunity. Let's start with the basics." Sarah Chen glanced at her tablet, and Evan saw his resume reflected in miniature on the screen. "You don't have a college degree." It wasn't a question. Evan had known this moment would come, had rehearsed answers during those long warehouse shifts, whispered responses to himself on the bus, practiced confidence he didn't feel. "No, ma'am. I completed 2 years of community college before my daughter was born. Since then, I've been studying data engineering through online courses, MIT OpenCourseWare, Stanford's free programs, several certification tracks. I've built a portfolio of projects that demonstrate practical application of database architecture, system optimization, and self-taught." Lucas Brandt's voice carried the particular dismissiveness of someone who'd never had to learn anything the hard way. "That's admirable, truly. But Astron works with Fortune 500 clients. They expect credentials, pedigrees. They want to know their consultants came from Stanford, MIT, Carnegie Mellon, not—" He gestured vaguely at Evan's resume, letting the silence finish his sentence. "I understand that concern." Evan kept his voice steady, falling back on the composure he'd learned from years of swallowing pride, eating rejection, smiling through humiliation. "But respectfully, clients don't care where their solutions come from. They care if their systems work. The distributed database optimization project in my portfolio reduced query time by 63%. The data pipeline restructuring eliminated redundancy issues that were costing, according to you." Sarah Chen's interruption was polite but final. "Without independent verification, without institutional backing, these are just claims." Peterson leaned forward slightly, and Evan caught something in his expression. Not sympathy, exactly, but perhaps the memory of a time before corner offices and executive decisions. Tell me about your current work, Mr. Cole. You're in logistics? Warehouse operations at Morrison Distribution. No point in dressing it up. Night shift supervisor for the past 3 years. Before that, freight handling, inventory management. I coordinate routing algorithms, optimize loading patterns, manage the database system that tracks everything from receiving to dispatch. So you've managed people? Peterson asked. 14 on my direct team, up to 40 during peak seasons. And the technical work? The database management? That system was failing when I started. Constant errors, lost shipments, inventory that existed in the computer but not in reality. I rebuilt it from the ground up, new relational architecture, automated error checking, predictive analytics for demand forecasting. Reduced operational errors by 82% in the first year. Lucas Brandt smiled, and it wasn't kind. And this was all you? Forgive my skepticism, but that's a significant undertaking for someone without formal training. I had help from the existing IT contractor. He provided the framework. I did the implementation, troubleshooting, and ongoing optimization. Evan met Lucas's eyes. I can provide references, documentation of the work, before and after performance metrics. From a warehouse. Sarah Chen said it like the words tasted strange. Mr. Cole, I appreciate your initiative, truly, but Astron Consulting isn't Morrison Distribution. Our smallest client operates at a scale that would dwarf your entire company. The complexity, the stakes, the scrutiny, it's a different world. Evan wanted to argue, wanted to explain that complexity was complexity, that data didn't care about office locations or job titles, that he'd spent 3 years doing exactly the kind of systems thinking they claimed to value. But he could see it in their faces. The decision had been made before he walked in, maybe before he'd even applied. This was a courtesy interview, a box to check, a story they could tell themselves about giving everyone a fair chance. I understand. Evan stood, extending his hand to each of them again. Thank you for your time. Peterson shook firmly. We'll be in touch, Mr. Cole. They wouldn't. Evan knew the script. He was halfway to the door when every screen in the room exploded with red. The transformation was instantaneous. The wall-mounted monitors that had been displaying Astron's sleek logo suddenly blazed crimson, text scrolling across them in angry capitals. Project Atlas, critical failure, system collapse, client notification initiated. What the hell? Lucas Brandt was already on his feet, phone out, fingers flying across the screen. No, 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 no! Sarah Chen's tablet chimed with an urgency that made her flinch. Peterson's phone started ringing, the tone cutting through the room like an alarm. How bad? Peterson demanded, already moving toward the door. Bad. Lucas's face had gone pale. The entire Atlas infrastructure just crashed. We're talking complete data loss across all client integration points. Jenkins is going to— oh God, he's already calling. The phone in Lucas's hand buzzed with an incoming call. He stared at it like it might bite him. Answer it, Peterson said. Sarah, get Miranda on the line. Now. Evan stood frozen by the door, invisible again, watching 3 people who'd dismissed him minutes ago now scrambling through a crisis he didn't understand. Project Atlas. The name meant nothing to him, but the panic in the room was unmistakable. Lucas answered his phone, voice instantly smoothing into professional calm that didn't match his expression. James, I'm looking at it right now. Yes, I understand the urgency. We have our entire team mobilizing as we speak. Lie. Evan could hear it in the tiny hesitation, see it in the way Lucas's free hand clenched and unclenched. Mr. Cole. Peterson had his own phone pressed to his ear, but gestured sharply at Evan. You can leave through the main lobby. We'll contact you about next steps. Dismissed. Evan nodded and reached for the door handle. Can't be done. The architecture was fundamentally flawed from the start. Lucas's voice rose despite his obvious effort to control it. We've been telling the client for months that their timeline was unrealistic, that the integration points weren't— What? No, that's not what James, you need to understand that this wasn't a failure of execution. This was a failure of the client to... Evan paused, hand on the door. Don't you dare blame this on us. The voice on the other end of Lucas's phone was loud enough to carry across the room. Your team signed off on every milestone. Your report said we were green across the board. You personally assured me 3 weeks ago that all critical issues had been resolved. We identified numerous concerns, Lucas said, voice tight. It's documented in our weekly summaries. If those concerns weren't escalated on your end, I want every piece of documentation you have, every email, every report, every goddamn post-it note. And I want Miranda Hale on the phone in the next 10 minutes explaining how a $20 million project just evaporated. The line went dead. Lucas stood there, phone still pressed to his ear, looking like he'd just watched his career catch fire. Was that James Jenkins? Sarah Chen asked quietly. Yes. From Atlas Engineering. Yes. The client we've been courting for 3 years, whose contract renewal is worth $200 million. Lucas said nothing. Peterson's phone call ended with a curt, understood, that promised nothing good. He looked at Lucas with an expression Evan recognized from warehouse disasters, the cold calculation of someone deciding who would take the fall. Miranda wants everyone in the war room, now, and she wants answers. The data's gone, Lucas said. 8 months of client integration work, calibration data, validation runs, everything. The backup systems didn't trigger. We're looking at complete reconstruction from whatever we can salvage. How long? Weeks, maybe months, and that's assuming we can even figure out what went wrong. Sarah Chen was typing rapidly on her tablet. Do we have anyone who actually understands the Atlas architecture? The original team... Half of them left after the restructuring, Lucas interrupted. The documentation is fragmented. Most of the institutional knowledge walked out the door. Evan's hand was still on the door handle. He should leave. This wasn't his problem, wasn't his world, wasn't his catastrophe to witness. But something in Lucas's voice, that edge of panic wrapped in false confidence, made him pause. The integration protocols, Evan said quietly. Were they running on a distributed architecture or centralized? 3 heads turned toward him. For a moment, no one spoke. Excuse me? Lucas's tone suggested Evan had just spoken in a foreign language. The data you lost. Was it distributed across multiple nodes with redundancy? Or was it centralized with backup systems that were supposed to trigger automatically? How is that relevant? Sarah Chen's professional mask had slipped slightly, revealing genuine confusion about why the rejected applicant was still in the room. Because if it was centralized, the failure point is probably in the backup trigger logic. The data might not be gone, just inaccessible because the automated systems didn't recognize the failure state correctly. But if it was distributed, you're looking at a coordination failure across nodes, which means the data's probably still there but fragmented. Lucas stared at him. You can't possibly know anything about Project Atlas. I don't, Evan admitted, but I know data architecture. And what you're describing sounds like a failure I've seen before. Not at this scale, obviously, but the pattern's familiar. Mr. Cole, Peterson said slowly, you're suggesting we haven't actually lost the data? That it's recoverable? I'm suggesting it's possible. Depends on how the system was built, what the failure actually was, whether the triggers failed or the architecture collapsed. Without seeing the setup, I can't be sure. This is insane. Lucas's laugh was sharp, brittle. You're a warehouse supervisor. You came in here admitting you're self-taught, and now you're diagnosing a multi-million-dollar enterprise system failure based on what exactly? Pattern recognition, Evan said simply. And the fact that what you're describing doesn't sound like total data loss. It sounds like total access loss, which is recoverable if you can identify where the breakdown happened. Peterson and Lucas exchanged a look. Sarah Chen had stopped typing, watching Evan with an expression he couldn't quite read. The war room meeting, Peterson said finally. You should come. Absolutely not. Bump. Lucas's voice went hard. With all due respect, sir, we're about to discuss highly sensitive client information with the CEO present. This man doesn't even work here. He failed his interview 5 minutes ago. He also just identified a possibility our entire technical team missed, Peterson countered. Miranda wants answers. Maybe she should hear from someone with fresh eyes. Fresh eyes with no credentials, no clearance, and no understanding of the complexity involved. Lucas turned to Evan. No offense, Mr. Cole, but this isn't a warehouse inventory system. This is enterprise-level architecture, serving a client whose annual revenue exceeds most countries' GDP. The stakes are beyond anything you've encountered. You're probably right, Evan agreed, but you're also panicking, and panic makes people miss obvious things. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Mr. Cole, Sarah Chen said carefully, if you did somehow help us recover this data, hypothetically speaking, what would you expect in return? Evan thought about Mia waiting at Mrs. Chen's apartment, about the bus ride home he couldn't afford to miss, about the grocery money he'd spent on dry cleaning this damned blazer. A job, he said, the one I interviewed for, the one you were never going to give me. That's... Lucas started. Blackmail? Evan shook his head. No, it's negotiation. You need help. I might be able to provide it. In exchange, I want what I came here for, a chance to prove I can do the work regardless of where I learned how. Peterson's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression tightened. Miranda's asking why we're not in the war room yet. This is a terrible idea, Lucas said. Probably, Peterson agreed, but we're out of good ones. He looked at Evan. The war room, 5th floor. You speak only if directly asked a question. You touch nothing. You sign an NDA before we even get in the elevator, and if this goes badly, then I never worked here, never saw anything, and we never had this conversation, Evan finished. I understand. Sarah Chen was already pulling up documents on her tablet. Standard non-disclosure agreement, confidentiality clause, breach penalties that would bankrupt you 3 times over. Where do I sign? Us. The war room earned its name. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, but heavy curtains could drop in seconds, sealing the space from outside view. A massive table dominated the center, surrounded by chairs that probably cost more than Evan's car had when it still worked. Wall-mounted screens displayed data feeds, system architectures, and currently, a lot of angry red error messages. Miranda Hale stood at the head of the table, and Evan understood immediately why people spoke her name with a particular tone. She was 50-something, silver-haired, dressed in a way that suggested she'd stopped caring about trends around the same time she'd stopped caring about other people's opinions. Her eyes moved across the assembled group with the precision of someone conducting an autopsy. 17 minutes, she said. That's how long it took for James Jenkins to call me personally. Not our account manager, not our project lead. Me, the CEO. To inform me that 8 months of work had vanished, and that his company is reconsidering whether Asteron is competent enough to manage a grocery list, let alone a $200 million contract renewal. No one spoke. Lucas? Miranda's gaze locked onto the technical lead. Explain how this happened. Lucas stood, tablet in hand, and Evan recognized the performance immediately. The subtle straightening of shoulders, the careful modulation of voice, the transformation from panicked professional to confident expert. The Atlas project involved integrating our proprietary data management system with the client's existing infrastructure, Lucas began. The complexity was significant. Multiple legacy systems, inconsistent data formats, strict regulatory requirements. We identified numerous risk factors early on and documented them extensively. I've read your reports, Miranda interrupted. They all concluded with green status indicators and assurances that issues were being addressed. Were they? A microsecond of hesitation. We addressed what we could within the constraints we were given. The client's timeline was aggressive. Their unwillingness to modernize certain legacy components created integration challenges that we flagged repeatedly. So this is the client's fault. I'm saying the failure occurred at integration points we'd identified as vulnerable. The client chose not to prioritize those areas for the infrastructure investment we recommended. Miranda's expression didn't change. Marcus, you're head of the Atlas technical team. Do you agree with Lucas's assessment? A man in his 30s, Marcus Chen, Evan remembered from the hurried introductions, looked profoundly uncomfortable. The integration points were definitely challenging, but we also encountered some unexpected issues with the core architecture that weren't in the original specifications. What kind of issues? Data synchronization failures, mostly. The system would show successful writes on our end, but the client's systems weren't actually receiving or storing the data correctly. We implemented patches, ran validation tests, got green lights across the board. He paused. Obviously, the validation wasn't catching something. Obviously, Miranda agreed. Sarah, from an HR perspective, do we have the expertise we need on this project? Sarah Chen straightened. The team is comprised of senior consultants with relevant experience. Lucas has led successful projects of similar complexity. The qualifications are solid. And yet, Miranda gestured at the screens full of error messages. Evan stood against the back wall, trying to be invisible while absorbing everything. The conversation had the rhythm of people protecting themselves, carefully worded statements, strategic deflections, the kind of defensive positioning he'd seen in warehouse meetings when management was looking for someone to blame. I want options, Miranda said. Can we recover the data? Can we rebuild? How long will either take? And most importantly, can we salvage this client relationship? Data recovery is theoretically possible, Marcus said. But without knowing exactly what failed, we're essentially doing forensic analysis on a system that's still partially running. It's like performing surgery while the patient's walking around. Colorful. How long? Weeks minimum. Maybe longer. Rebuilding from scratch? Same timeline, probably. We'd need to reconstruct 8 months of integration work, recalibrate all the validation protocols, reestablish the data pipelines. Both options take too long. Miranda's voice was flat. Jenkins wants answers tomorrow. He wants a recovery plan by Friday. And he wants proof that this won't happen again, which means he wants to understand why it happened in the first place. Lucas shifted his weight slightly. With all due respect, that timeline is unrealistic. Complex system failures don't reveal themselves overnight. We need time to properly analyze. You had 8 months to properly analyze, Miranda interrupted. You had weekly reports, daily stand-ups, endless Slack channels full of technical discussion, and somehow no one saw this coming? The silence was damning. Miranda's gaze swept the room and landed on Evan. Who are you? Every eye turned. Evan felt his throat go dry. Evan Cole, ma'am. I was interviewing for a junior consultant position when the failure occurred. Mr. Peterson thought I might have relevant perspective. Relevant how? I suggested the data might not actually be lost, just inaccessible, due to a failure in the backup trigger systems or a coordination issue in a distributed architecture. Miranda looked at Peterson. Is he right? We don't know yet, Peterson admitted, but his hypothesis is worth exploring. What's your background, Mr. Cole? Here it was, the moment when his lack of credentials would end whatever strange opportunity had opened up. Warehouse operations management, night shift supervisor at Morrison Distribution, self-taught in data engineering through online courses and practical application. Miranda's expression didn't change. So you have no formal training, no enterprise experience, and no relevant pedigree. No, ma'am. But you think you understand what happened to a $20 million system that my highly credentialed team built? I think I might see it differently because I don't have assumptions about how it should work. Sometimes ignorance is useful. You notice things experts miss because you're not looking at what you expect to see. That's an interesting theory. Miranda walked closer, studying him with the intensity of someone used to reading people in seconds. Tell me what you see. Evan glanced at the screens, at the error logs scrolling past, at the architecture diagrams that meant nothing to him 5 minutes ago but were starting to form patterns. I see a lot of complexity, he said slowly. Maybe too much. All these integration points, all these validation layers, all these backup systems. It's like building a house with so many support beams that nobody can remember which ones are actually holding things up. Oversimplification, Lucas muttered. Maybe, Evan agreed, but simple systems fail in simple ways. Complex systems fail in ways nobody predicted because nobody could keep track of all the variables. You've got error messages here, he pointed at one screen, that reference systems mentioned over here, another screen, but the failure seems to have originated somewhere else entirely. The problem isn't that something broke, it's that when it broke, everything else broke in ways that don't make obvious sense. Which suggests, Miranda prompted, that the architecture has dependencies nobody documented, hidden connections, The kind of thing that happens when you build a system piece by piece over time and everyone assumes someone else understands how it all fits together. Marcus Chen was leaning forward now, looking at the screens with new attention. There were a couple of times when we implemented workarounds for integration issues, quick fixes to keep the timeline moving. What kind of workarounds? Miranda asked. Nothing major, just routing data through different pathways when the primary ones were unstable. Temporary solutions until we could implement proper fixes. Did you implement proper fixes? Marcus's silence was answer enough. So you built a system held together with temporary solutions, Miranda said. And now you're surprised it failed catastrophically. That's not fair, Lucas protested. Every enterprise project involves compromise. Perfect is the enemy of good. We delivered functionality on schedule and within budget, until it collapsed, Miranda finished, taking our client relationship with it. She turned back to Evan. Can you fix this? The question hung in the air like a challenge. I don't know, Evan said honestly. I'd need to see the actual architecture, understand the data flows, identify where the breakdown happened. And even then, I might not be able to do anything your team couldn't do better. But you'd approach it differently. Yes. How? Evan thought about the Morrison distribution system, about the nights he'd spent staring at error logs until his eyes burned, about the simple truth he'd learned through hundreds of small failures. Complicated problems usually had simple roots. I'd start by turning things off, he said, systematically. One piece at a time. See what breaks when you remove each component. It's slow, it's tedious, but it maps the dependencies. Once you know what actually needs what, you can see where the hidden connections are. That could take weeks, Lucas objected. So could trying to analyze everything at once without knowing what you're looking for, Evan countered. At least this way, you build a map of the territory as you go. Miranda studied him for a long moment. Then she looked at Peterson. Hire him. Ma'am, Lucas started. Not a suggestion, Lucas. Hire him. Junior consultant, standard contract, immediate start. She turned back to Evan. You wanted a job. You've got one. But here's the deal. You work alongside Lucas's team. You bring your warehouse perspective, your simple system thinking, your fresh eyes. But you also listen to people who've been doing this longer than you've been alive. Understood? Yes, ma'am. And if you're wrong about this, if your hypothesis leads us down a dead end while the clock runs out, you're gone. Not just fired. Gone as in we never had this conversation and your NDA ensures you never mention Astron again. Understood. Lucas, you have a problem with this. Lucas's jaw was tight. No, ma'am. Liar. But you'll work with him anyway because I'm telling you to and because maybe, just maybe, someone without your expertise will see something you missed. She addressed the room. We have 72 hours to give Jenkins a recovery plan that doesn't sound like desperate improvisation. I want Marcus and Evan working together on the diagnostic analysis. Lucas, you coordinate with the client, manage expectations, and for God's sake, stop trying to deflect blame. Sarah, you process Evan's hiring paperwork tonight. Peterson, you make sure everyone understands that failure is not an option we're considering. She moved toward the door, then paused. Mr. Cole, one more thing. Yes, ma'am? What you said about complexity, about too many support beams, that wasn't just about the system, was it? Evan met her eyes. No, ma'am. It's about how organizations work, too. Lots of layers, lots of processes, lots of people assuming someone else has the full picture. Eventually, you can't tell what's actually necessary from what just accumulated over time. Careful, Miranda said, but there was something almost like approval in her voice. That kind of thinking is how people end up in my job, or fired for insubordination, sometimes both. She left, and the room exhaled collectively. Marcus approached Evan, hand extended. Welcome to the disaster. I'm Marcus Chen, and I apparently just became your partner in potential career suicide. Evan shook his hand. Evan Cole, I'm really good at potential career suicide. Had lots of practice. Great, let's go commit it together. I'll show you the architecture diagrams. What's left of them, anyway. Lucas hadn't moved from his position near the screens. As Evan passed, the technical lead spoke quietly. You think you've won something. You haven't. You've just volunteered to be the scapegoat when this inevitably fails. Maybe, Evan agreed, but at least I'll fail trying, instead of failing while protecting myself. He followed Marcus out of the war room, leaving Lucas standing alone among the error messages and shattered projections, and tried not to think about how he'd just bet everything he didn't have on a problem he barely understood. His phone buzzed. "Mrs. Chen. Mia's asking when you're coming home. Everything okay?" Evan typed back, "Got the job. Might be late. Extra grateful for your help." The response came immediately. "Congratulations, Mia will be so proud. Take your time." Evan pocketed his phone and followed Marcus into an elevator that descended toward the technical floors, toward server rooms and workstations, and the kind of problem that could either prove he belonged here or destroy what little he'd built. The door hadn't just slammed shut. It had exploded open. Now he had to walk through the wreckage and find something worth saving on the other side. The technical floor existed in a different universe than the executive suites above. Where Miranda's war room had been all glass and minimalism, this space was controlled chaos. Workstations crammed with multiple monitors, cables snaking across floors, whiteboards covered in diagrams that looked like abstract art, and the constant hum of servers breathing in the dedicated cooling system that kept everything from melting down. Marcus led Evan through a maze of cubicles to a corner workspace that had clearly become crisis central. 3 additional monitors had been wheeled in, all displaying different aspects of the Atlas catastrophe. A woman in her late 20s looked up from a laptop covered in coding stickers, her expression shifting from exhausted to curious as she registered Evan's presence. "This is Diana Park," Marcus said, "our best systems analyst and the person who's been screaming into the void about Atlas issues for the past 3 months. Diana, this is Evan Cole. He's the fresh perspective Miranda just hired to either save us or go down with the ship." Diana studied Evan with the particular skepticism of someone who'd watched too many saviors fail. "You're the warehouse guy." "I'm the warehouse guy," Evan confirmed. "No offense, but what exactly do you think you're going to see that we haven't already dissected from every possible angle?" "Probably nothing," Evan admitted. "But I'm here anyway, so we might as well find out." Something in his honesty seemed to shift Diana's assessment. She gestured to an empty chair. "Fair enough. Welcome to hell. It's got great coffee and terrible hours." Marcus pulled up a chair, dragging it close enough that all 3 of them could see the central monitor. "Okay, crash course in Project Atlas. The client, Atlas Engineering, is a massive industrial firm. They design everything from bridges to offshore drilling platforms. Their data infrastructure is a nightmare. 30 years of accumulated systems that barely talk to each other. They hired us to build a unified data management platform that could integrate everything." "How many legacy systems?" Evan asked. 17 major ones? Probably twice that in minor subsystems and specialized tools. "And you were trying to connect them all?" "Not connect, unify. Create a central intelligence layer that could pull data from all sources, validate it, cross-reference it, and present it in a coherent interface. Imagine trying to make 17 people who speak different languages not only understand each other but agree on what they're saying." Diana snorted. "Except the 17 people also hate change, don't trust anyone else's information, and have been doing things their own way since before we were born." Evan leaned forward, studying the architecture diagram on screen. It looked like a tangled web of boxes and arrows, each connection representing data flowing between systems. "This is what you built?" "That's the theoretical architecture," Marcus said. "What we actually built is messier." "Show me the messy version." Diana's fingers flew across the keyboard. The clean diagram disappeared, replaced by something that made Evan's head hurt. The theoretical architecture had been complicated. This was chaos, lines crossing other lines, boxes connected to things they shouldn't be, entire sections that seemed to exist in isolation. "Welcome to reality," Diana muttered. "Every time we hit an integration problem, we had to route around it. Every time a legacy system wouldn't cooperate, we had to build a workaround. Every time the client demanded functionality we hadn't planned for, we had to bolt on new connections." "It's like a city that grew without urban planning," Evan said slowly. "Started as a small town, kept adding neighborhoods without thinking about how they connected. And now you've got streets that dead end, bridges that go nowhere. Infrastructure that made sense when it was built, but doesn't fit the whole." Marcus nodded. "Exactly. And we kept telling Lucas this was happening, kept warning that we were accumulating technical debt, that the workarounds needed to be replaced with proper solutions. What did he say? He said the timeline was non-negotiable and that we'd address it in Phase 2. Diana's voice went flat. There is no Phase 2. Phase 1 just exploded. Evan studied the diagram, trying to find patterns in the chaos. Where did the failure start? That's the $20 million question, Marcus said. The error logs show simultaneous failures across multiple systems. It's like watching dominoes fall, except the dominoes are falling in 6 different directions at once. Can you show me the sequence? Even if they happen simultaneously, there has to be an order. Computers process things sequentially, even if it happens faster than we can track. Diana pulled up a different screen, this one showing a timeline of system events. Thousands of entries scrolled past, red error messages bleeding into each other like a hemorrhage. This is filtered down to just the critical failures, she said. The full log is about 8 million entries long. Nobody's getting through that manually. Evan watched the timeline, letting his eyes unfocus slightly, looking for patterns the way he'd learned to spot inventory discrepancies at Morrison. Numbers told stories if you knew how to read them. Errors clustered in ways that revealed root causes. There, he said, pointing. That spike at 1423. Before all the catastrophic failures, there's a cluster of warnings about data synchronization timeouts. Marcus leaned in. We get those all the time. Legacy systems are slow. Timeouts are normal. But look at which system is timing out. That node there. Evan traced a path through Diana's chaotic diagram. It's connected to 5 other major systems. If it starts timing out, everything downstream has to wait. The validation server, Diana breathed. Oh God, we made the validation server a mandatory checkpoint. Meaning? Meaning every piece of data flowing through the Atlas platform has to pass through validation before it gets stored anywhere. We did it to ensure data integrity across all the legacy systems. But if the validation server slows down, everything backs up, Evan finished, like a traffic jam. One slow intersection can paralyze an entire grid. Marcus was already pulling up system configurations. The validation server was handling an average of 40,000 transactions per hour. But look at this. He pointed to a graph showing server load. 3 days ago, transaction volume spiked to 70,000 per hour. Someone must have initiated a massive data migration. The quarterly engineering report upload, Diana said, face going pale. The client does it every quarter. They dump 3 months of project data all at once. We knew it was coming. We even flagged it as a potential stress test. Did you increase server capacity? We requested it. Lucas said it wasn't in the budget for this phase. Diana's hands clenched into fists. He said the existing infrastructure could handle it because the theoretical maximum load was 90,000 transactions per hour. Theoretical, Evan repeated. Meaning never tested under real-world conditions with all the workarounds and patched connections we'd accumulated, Marcus said bitterly. We should have pushed harder, should have refused to certify the system as ready. Why didn't you? The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Because Lucas is brilliant, Diana finally said. Because he's led successful projects before. Because when he tells you something will work, you believe him. And because... She trailed off. Because questioning him has consequences, Marcus finished. He doesn't take kindly to having his judgment challenged. Evan thought about the interview, about Lucas's smooth dismissal of concerns, about the way he'd pivoted to blaming the client the moment things went wrong. Has he always been like this? Lucas is complicated, Marcus said carefully. He's genuinely talented. Some of the architectures he's designed are elegant as hell, but he's also convinced that talent means he's always right. And when you work for someone who's usually right, you start second-guessing your own instincts when you disagree. Even when those instincts are screaming danger. Especially then. Diana pulled up another screen, this one showing email chains. Look at this. 6 weeks ago, I sent Lucas a detailed analysis showing that the validation server was becoming a bottleneck. I recommended either distributing the validation process across multiple servers or implementing a priority queue system so critical data could bypass slower validation checks. What did he say? He said my analysis was technically sound but operationally naive, that distributed validation would introduce consistency issues we couldn't afford. That priority queuing would create two-tier data integrity, which would violate our contract with the client. Both of which are real concerns, Marcus added. Lucas isn't wrong about the problems. He's just wrong about whether those problems are worse than the bottleneck Diana identified. Evan scanned the email chain. Lucas's responses were thorough, technically detailed, and utterly dismissive of the underlying warning. He wins the argument while missing the point. That's his superpower, Diana said. You can't pin him down because he's always technically correct about something, even when he's fundamentally wrong about everything. The door to the workspace area opened, and Lucas himself walked in, followed by two other team members Evan didn't recognize. The technical lead's expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes were sharp. Making progress? Lucas asked. We identified the likely trigger, Marcus said. The validation server became a bottleneck during the quarterly data upload. Everything backed up behind it until the system started timing out across the board. The validation server we discussed upgrading 6 weeks ago, Diana added, voice neutral but pointed. Lucas's jaw tightened fractionally. The validation server that was operating well within its specified parameters until the client dumped an unexpected volume of data without warning us. They warned us, Diana said. Email chain from 8 weeks ago, CC'd to you, confirming the schedule for quarterly uploads. Warning of a routine process isn't the same as warning of a volume spike that exceeded historical averages by 40%. The volume didn't exceed anything, Marcus said. It was consistent with the previous 3 quarters. We just weren't handling it efficiently because of all the routing workarounds we'd implemented. Lucas looked at Evan. And what's your contribution to this diagnosis, besides spectating while my team does the actual analysis? I asked where the failure started, Evan said. Everything else followed from that question. Profound. I'm sure your warehouse experience prepared you to ask such penetrating questions. Diana made a noise that might have been a suppressed laugh. Marcus suddenly became very interested in his keyboard. Lucas, Evan said carefully, I'm not here to make you look bad. I'm here because Miranda wanted a different perspective. If that perspective helps, great. If not, I'm gone in 72 hours anyway. 68 hours now, Lucas corrected. And for the record, I don't need protecting from looking bad. My work speaks for itself. Does it? The question came from one of the 2 people who'd entered with Lucas, a man in his 40s with silver-threaded hair and the kind of weathered competence that spoke of decades in the trenches. Because right now, your work is speaking pretty loudly about a $20 million failure. Lucas turned and Evan saw genuine surprise cross his face. Robert, I didn't realize you were back from the Singapore project. Miranda called me this morning, said we had a crisis that needed perspective from someone who wasn't invested in protecting their reputation. Robert crossed the workspace, extending a hand to Evan. Robert Chen, I'm Marcus's uncle and apparently the designated adult supervision for this disaster. Evan Cole, the warehouse supervisor who's making everyone nervous, Robert said, shaking firmly. Miranda filled me in, said you looked at our catastrophe and saw a bottleneck instead of a mystery. That true? I saw a pattern that reminded me of problems I'd encountered before. Smaller scale, same principle. Robert nodded slowly. Scale is relative. Principles aren't. Diana, show me this validation server analysis you sent Lucas. As Diana pulled up the documentation, Lucas's expression hardened. Robert, with all due respect, second-guessing decisions made months ago doesn't help us recover now. With all due respect, right back at you, understanding how we got here is the only way to make sure we don't end up here again. Miranda isn't just worried about this contract. She's worried about the pattern. What pattern? The pattern where brilliant technical leads ignore warnings from their teams, make judgment calls that prioritize timeline over sustainability, and then act surprised when things collapse. Robert settled into a chair. I've seen it before, usually right before someone gets fired. The temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. Are you threatening me? Lucas asked quietly. I'm stating facts. You built a system with a single point of failure, ignored warnings about that failure point, and now we're scrambling to fix it before we lose a client worth more than this entire division. Those are facts. What Miranda does with those facts is above my pay grade. Lucas looked like he wanted to say something scathing, but the presence of Robert Chen, who apparently carried enough weight to make even the technical lead cautious, kept him silent. Instead, he turned to the two people who'd accompanied him. "This is Jennifer Park and David Rodriguez. They're from our data recovery team. I've asked them to assess whether we can salvage the Atlas data or if we need to rebuild from scratch." Jennifer, a woman in her early 30s with the kind of focused intensity that suggested she lived half her life in code, nodded at the assembled group. "We've been analyzing the backup systems. The good news is the data isn't actually gone. The bad news is it's fragmented across 17 different backup locations with inconsistent timestamp protocols. Meaning we can't reliably reconstruct the sequence," David added. He was younger, maybe mid-20s, with the slightly manic energy of someone running on caffeine and adrenaline. "It's like dropping a book in a pond and trying to reassemble it after the pages have scattered. The pages still exist, but figuring out what order they go in is complicated," Evan said, "but not impossible. If you know the original structure, the chapters, the page numbers, the reference points, you can rebuild even if the sequence is scrambled." "The original structure is what failed," Jennifer pointed out. "We can't trust it to guide reassembly. But you can trust the content relationships, data points that reference each other, timestamps that cluster around events, validation checksums that confirm integrity." Evan was thinking out loud now, drawing on the Morrison experience where he'd reconstructed corrupted inventory databases. "You don't need to know the order if you can identify the connections." Diana sat up straighter. "A dependency graph. We map which data points rely on which other data points, use that to establish a logical sequence, even if the temporal sequence is broken." "That would take weeks to build manually," David objected. "So we automate it," Marcus said, already typing. "Write a script that analyzes the data fragments, identifies cross-references, builds the graph automatically." "You're talking about analyzing millions of data points," Lucas said. "The processing time alone would exceed our deadline." "Not if we parallelize it," Jennifer countered, and Evan could see her mind working. "Distribute the analysis across multiple systems, have each one process a subset, and report connections back to a central coordinator." "Like the system we should have built in the first place," Diana muttered. Robert stood, moving to the whiteboard. "Let's map this out. Jennifer, David, you handle the technical architecture for the recovery script. Marcus, Diana, you focus on identifying the critical data we need first. Don't try to recover everything at once. Figure out what Atlas engineering needs to keep operating and prioritize that." "And what about me?" Lucas asked, voice tight. "You talk to the client," Robert said. "James Jenkins is going to call again, probably within the hour. He's going to want updates. You give him realistic timelines, honest assessments, and absolutely zero blame shifting. Understood?" Lucas's expression suggested he understood but didn't appreciate it. "And what will you be doing?" "Calling in favors. We're going to need more computing power than we have on site. I know people at AWS who owe me. We can spin up cloud instances to handle the parallel processing." Robert looked at Evan. "You ever worked with cloud infrastructure?" "Only theoretically. Read about it, understand the principles, never actually implemented it." "Good enough. You're with me. Everyone else, you've got 2 hours to have a working prototype of this recovery approach. Not perfect, not polished, working. If it shows promise, we go all in. If not, we pivot to rebuild mode and pray the client doesn't fire us first." The workspace exploded into motion. Jennifer and David huddled over a laptop, voices overlapping as they architected the recovery script. Marcus and Diana dove into the Atlas data structures, marking priority systems with the speed of people who'd lived with this project long enough to know every critical component. Lucas stood frozen for a moment, watching his team operate under someone else's direction, then pulled out his phone and walked toward a quiet corner. Robert gestured for Evan to follow him to a different workspace, one lined with reference materials and multiple computers that looked like they'd been configured for serious processing power. "You handled that well," Robert said once they were alone. "Lucas testing you, I mean. He does that, challenges people to see how they react under pressure. He seems to think I'm a threat." "You are a threat. Not to his job. Miranda's not going to fire him over this, not immediately anyway, but you're a threat to his narrative. Lucas has built his career on being the smartest person in the room. You walking in and seeing things differently undermines that story. I'm not trying to undermine anything. I just want to help fix the problem. Robert smiled. That's what makes you dangerous. You're not playing politics. You actually care about solving things rather than looking good while they stay broken. He pulled up a screen showing various cloud service options. Here's the crash course in cloud computing. Normally, our servers are physical machines in the building. They have fixed processing power, fixed memory, fixed everything. Cloud infrastructure is different. We rent computing power by the hour from massive data centers. Need more processing? Spin up more virtual machines. Need less? Shut them down. So we can temporarily access more power than we could ever afford to own permanently. Exactly. For data recovery like this, we can spin up 100 virtual machines, have them all process different chunks of data simultaneously, then shut them down when we're done. Total cost is maybe a few $1,000s instead of millions in permanent infrastructure. Evan watched as Robert navigated through AWS dashboards with practiced ease. How do you know all this? I thought you were a consultant, not a cloud architect. I'm old enough to have done everything at least once. Started as a programmer, moved into systems architecture, spent time in ops, did a stint in infrastructure planning. When you've been around long enough, you accumulate knowledge from every disaster you've survived. Is that what this is? Another disaster to survive? Robert paused, meeting Evan's eyes. Honestly, this one's different. Most technical failures happen because something unexpected occurred. Edge case, nobody predicted, hardware that died at the worst moment, software bug that only appears under specific conditions. Those are survivable because they're genuinely unforeseeable. But this wasn't unforeseeable. This was predicted. Diana saw it coming. Marcus saw it coming. Hell, based on what I'm reading in the email archives Miranda sent me, half the team saw it coming. But Lucas made a judgment call that his approach was better than their concerns. And when you're the technical lead, when you've got the credentials and the track record and the confidence, people defer to your judgment even when their instincts say otherwise. So this is a leadership failure, not a technical one. It's both. The technical failure happened because of the leadership failure. And that's the kind that gets people fired, contracts canceled, companies shut down. Robert returned his attention to the screen, fingers moving rapidly across the keyboard. Which is why we're going to fix it. Not because Lucas deserves saving, but because everyone else on that team does. Diana, Marcus, Jennifer, David, they did their jobs. They raised concerns. They documented issues. They shouldn't pay for one person's hubris. Evan thought about the warehouse, about the times he'd raised concerns that management ignored, about the small catastrophes he'd prevented, and the larger ones he'd watched unfold because he didn't have the authority to override bad decisions. What happens if we can't fix it? Then we learn an expensive lesson about the difference between intelligence and wisdom. Lucas is intelligent, brilliantly so. But wisdom is knowing when you don't know enough, when you should listen to people who see things differently, when your confidence is becoming arrogance. Robert hit a final key with emphasis. There. We've got authorization for up to 200 virtual machines at peak capacity. More than enough to crunch through this data recovery if the approach works. A knock on the workspace entrance made them both look up. Lucas stood there, phone still in hand, expression carefully controlled. Jenkins wants a video call, he said. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. He's bringing his entire executive team. Miranda, Richard, and I will be presenting. He specifically asked whether we'd identified the root cause and whether we have a viable recovery plan. What did you tell him? Robert asked. That we're working on both and will have definitive answers by tomorrow morning. Lucas paused. He also asked who was leading the recovery effort. I told him it was a collaborative team approach under my technical direction. Was that true or strategic? Does it matter? To Miranda? Probably not. To the team out there working their asses off? Definitely. Lucas's expression hardened. I don't need leadership lessons from you, Robert. I've been leading technical teams since you were doing basic infrastructure work. And yet here we are, cleaning up a mess that leadership created. Funny how that works. The two men stared at each other, and Evan recognized the dynamic instantly. The older veteran who'd seen it all clashing with the younger expert who wouldn't acknowledge experience as wisdom. The call is at 9, Lucas repeated. We need something concrete to present. Can your recovery approach deliver that? If the team out there builds what they're designing, yes. If we get lucky and the data relationships are as recoverable as we think, yes. If Jenkins is willing to accept partial recovery of critical systems rather than complete reconstruction, yes. That's a lot of ifs. Welcome to disaster recovery. It's all ifs until it's done. Lucas nodded curtly and left. Robert watched him go, expression unreadable. You don't like him, Evan observed. I don't trust him, Robert corrected. There's a difference. Lucas is talented, charismatic, and utterly convinced of his own brilliance. That combination is incredibly powerful when things go right. When things go wrong, it's incredibly dangerous because he can't admit fault without shattering the self-image he's built. So he'll blame everyone else. Or he'll double down on defending his decisions. Watch. When we present tomorrow, every recovery solution we propose, Lucas will frame it as an extension of his original approach. Every problem we identify, he'll contextualize as an unforeseeable edge case. He'll take credit for the fixes while distancing himself from the failures. That's politics, Robert finished. Corporate survival. You'll learn quickly that technical skills only get you so far. The real game is managing perception, building narratives, making sure you're associated with successes and insulated from failures. Evan thought about Miranda's war room, about the careful way everyone had positioned themselves during that first meeting, about Lucas's immediate pivot to blaming the client. I hate that game. Most honest people do. But you'll play it anyway if you want to survive here. Robert's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and smiled. Marcus says they've got a working prototype. Let's go see if we're geniuses or just desperate. They returned to the main workspace to find controlled chaos. Diana had filled 3 whiteboards with data structure diagrams. Marcus was walking Jennifer through some kind of algorithm, gesturing at a screen filled with code. David was on a video call with someone, rapidly discussing processing architecture. Show us, Robert said. Jennifer pulled up a demonstration on the central monitor. Okay, this is a simplified version working on a small data subset, about 10,000 records instead of the millions we'll need to process. The script analyzes each data point, identifies references to other data points, and builds a dependency graph showing which data relies on which other data. The screen filled with a visualization that looked like a neural network, nodes connected by lines of varying thickness, clusters of related information forming patterns. The thickness of the connection indicates confidence level, Marcus explained. Thick lines mean strong dependencies, like a project record that directly references specific engineering calculations. Thin lines mean weaker associations, maybe just temporal correlation or indirect connections. And this works? Evan asked. On the test subset? Perfectly. We can reconstruct the logical sequence with 97% accuracy. Diana's voice carried cautious excitement. The 3% error rate is from data that genuinely has no strong dependencies, standalone records that don't connect to anything else. Those we'd have to manually review. Scale it up, Robert said. Run it against the full Atlas dataset using the cloud infrastructure I just set up. Let's see if it holds at volume. That'll take at least 6 hours to process, David warned. Then we start now. Jennifer, David, get the script deployed to the cloud instances. Marcus, Diana, you monitor the processing, watch for errors or anomalies. I want to know immediately if the accuracy rate starts dropping. Robert checked his watch. It's 6 p.m. now. We'll reconvene at midnight for a status check. If it's working, we push through the night and have results by morning. If not, we pivot to Plan B. What's Plan B? Evan asked. Tell Jenkins we need 2 weeks and pray he doesn't fire us immediately. The team scattered to their assigned tasks. Evan found himself standing in the middle of organized chaos, unsure where he fit in this suddenly operational recovery effort. Diana noticed his hesitation. You any good with data visualization? Depends on what you mean by good. Can you look at that dependency graph and tell me which clusters represent critical systems versus peripheral data? Evan studied the visualization, looking for patterns. The clusters with the most connections are probably core systems. Lots of other data depends on them. The isolated clusters are either peripheral or broken dependencies that didn't get mapped correctly. Close enough. I need someone to review the graph as it builds and flag anything that looks wrong. You up for that? Absolutely. Diana pulled over a chair and keyboard. This screen will show the graph building in real time as the script processes data. You're looking for orphan nodes, data that should connect to something but doesn't. Also watch for overclustered areas. Too many connections might mean the script is finding false correlations. What do I do when I spot something? Tag it. There's a flagging system built into the interface. Anything you flag gets routed to me for manual review. Evan settled into the chair, watching as the visualization began to populate. It was hypnotic, nodes appearing one by one, connections forming like synapses firing, clusters coalescing into recognizable patterns. He fell into the rhythm of it, that same focused concentration he'd learned during inventory reconciliations, letting his mind find the anomalies without consciously searching for them. An hour passed. Then 2. People moved around him, voices rising and falling in technical discussions he half understood. Coffee appeared at his elbow, courtesy of Marcus. The visualization continued to grow, becoming more complex and somehow more comprehensible as the patterns emerged. You're good at this. Diana's voice made him look up. She was leaning over his shoulder, reviewing the flags he'd marked. Most of your tags are legitimate issues. A couple of false positives, but your accuracy rate is better than the automated systems. I'm just looking for things that don't fit the pattern. That's exactly what we need. Keep going. By midnight, the workspace had thinned out. Jennifer and David had gone home to sleep before the morning presentation. Marcus was dozing at his desk, head pillowed on crossed arms. Diana remained alert through sheer stubbornness and what smelled like her 5th cup of coffee. Robert moved between workstations, checking progress, making calls to coordinate the cloud processing. Lucas hadn't returned. Status check, Robert announced, voice cutting through the quiet hum of machines. Where are we? 62% processed, Diana reported. Error rate holding steady at 3.1%. No major anomalies. The dependency graph is mapping cleanly. Evan, anything concerning on the visualization? About 30 flagged items for review. Most are orphan nodes, data that seems disconnected from everything else. Could be genuinely standalone, or could be broken references the script isn't catching. Diana, can you resolve those flags? Give me 20 minutes. Robert nodded. Marcus, wake up. I need you coherent. Marcus stirred, blinking groggily. Time? Midnight. We're on track. Go home, sleep for 4 hours, come back ready to present. Same for you, Diana, after you resolve those flags. What about the processing? Diana asked. Someone should monitor. I'll monitor it. You all need to be sharp tomorrow when we're explaining this to Jenkins. Go, sleep. That's an order. Diana looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. She finished resolving Evan's flags with practiced efficiency, grabbed her bag, and headed for the elevator. Marcus followed, moving like a zombie. Robert and Evan were alone with the humming servers and the steadily growing visualization. You should sleep too, Robert said. Tomorrow's going to be brutal. So should you. I'm too old to sleep when there's work to do. Besides, someone needs to babysit these cloud instances. Might as well be me. Evan looked at the visualization, at the patterns still forming, at the data slowly being recovered from chaos. Can I ask you something? Shoot. Why did Miranda really hire me? It can't just be about fresh perspective. You've got talented people, Diana, Marcus, even Lucas when he's not protecting his ego. What do I bring that they don't? Robert settled into a chair, studying Evan with that same penetrating assessment Miranda had used. You want the political answer or the honest one? Honest. Miranda's building a case, not against Lucas specifically, but against a culture that's developed at Asteron. We've become a company that values pedigree over performance, credentials over competence, polish over problem solving. You're Exhibit A in that case. Someone who should have been hired on merit, but got rejected because you don't fit the profile. So I'm a symbol. You're a test. If you succeed here, if you prove that talent doesn't require a Stanford diploma, it challenges everything about how we hire, who we value, what we reward. It forces uncomfortable questions about all the other talented people we've rejected because they didn't check the right boxes. And if I fail, then the system validates itself. Lucas and people like him get to say, see, credentials matter, standards exist for a reason. We can't just hire anyone who thinks they're qualified. Robert's smile was sad. That's the weight you're carrying, whether you wanted it or not. Evan thought about Mia, about the years of night shifts and community college classes, about every door that had closed because he didn't have the right stamp on his resume. That's a lot of pressure. Yes, but here's the thing. You're not carrying it alone. Every person on that team out there, they're succeeding or failing with you. And tomorrow, when we walk into that video call with Jenkins, we're not presenting Evan Cole's recovery plan or Lucas Brandt's technical direction. We're presenting Astron's solution, together. Does Lucas see it that way? Probably not, but that's his weakness, not yours. The visualization completed another cluster, connections solidifying into a clear pattern. Evan watched the data find its structure, chaos resolving into order through nothing more magical than recognizing what belonged together. I need to call my daughter, he said quietly. Let her know I won't be home tonight. There's a quiet room down the hall. Take your time. Evan walked through the empty workspace, past dark monitors and silent keyboards, into a small conference room with glass walls and a door that actually closed. He pulled out his phone and called Mrs. Chen. Evan? Her voice was concerned. It's very late. I know. I'm sorry. Is Mia still awake? She fell asleep an hour ago. She was very excited about your new job. Told me all about how you're going to fix computers and help important people. Evan felt his throat tighten. Can you keep her tomorrow too? I know it's asking a lot. Of course, this job, it's going well. I think so. It's hard to tell. But I'm learning things I never could have imagined. Then it's worth it. Mia will understand. She's very proud of you, you know. I don't deserve her. Every parent says that. Go do your important work. We'll be here when you're ready. The call ended. Evan sat in the quiet conference room, surrounded by glass walls that made privacy an illusion, and let himself feel the weight of everything riding on tomorrow. Not just the contract, not just his job, but the test Robert had described, whether someone like him belonged in this world of credentials and pedigree. His phone buzzed, a text from Marcus. Still here? Evan typed back. Yeah, can't sleep anyway. Same. Want to see something cool? Evan returned to the workspace to find Marcus at his computer, pulling up the dependency graph. The visualization had grown enormous, thousands of nodes connected by millions of lines, but with clear structure emerging from the chaos. Look at this cluster, Marcus said, highlighting a dense section. That's the core project management data, timelines, budgets, resource allocations, and here, he highlighted another area. Engineering calculations, structural analyses, safety certifications. The script correctly identified them as separate but related domains. It's working, Evan said, feeling something like hope. It's working, Marcus confirmed. We're going to pull this off, recover the data, save the contract, maybe even learn something about how not to build systems in the future. And Lucas? Marcus's expression darkened. Lucas will take credit for the recovery and minimize the failure that made it necessary. Robert's right about that. But you know what? I don't care anymore. I'm tired of protecting people who won't protect their teams. If Lucas wants to play politics, fine. I'll just keep doing good work with people I trust. Like Diana. Like Diana? Like Robert? Like you. Even though you've been here less than a day and I still don't entirely understand how you ended up in the middle of our disaster. Evan laughed, surprised by how good it felt. I don't entirely understand it either, but I'm glad I'm here. Yeah? Yeah. This is what I've wanted, to work on problems that matter, with people who care about solving them rather than looking good while they fail. Even if it's just for 72 hours before I get fired for not having the right credentials. You're not going to get fired, Marcus said with certainty. Miranda doesn't make symbolic gestures. She hired you because she saw something worth keeping, and after tomorrow, everyone else will see it too. The visualization continued to grow, data finding its connections, chaos becoming order one node at a time. Evan watched it build, feeling something shift inside him, not confidence exactly, but the recognition that he belonged here not despite his unconventional path, but because of it. The door that had slammed shut hadn't just reopened. It had led him somewhere he'd never imagined he could reach, somewhere he might actually deserve to stay. Morning arrived with the cruelty of fluorescent lights that had never been turned off. Evan woke slumped over a keyboard, neck screaming protest, to find Robert standing over him with 2 cups of coffee that smelled like salvation. "Drink," Robert commanded. "We've got 90 minutes before the video call, and you look like death." Evan accepted the coffee, letting the heat seep into his hands. The workspace had transformed overnight. Diana was back, hair still damp from a shower, reviewing printouts of the dependency graphs. Marcus sat with Jennifer and David, all 3 of them running through what looked like a presentation outline. The visualization on the main monitor had completed, a vast, intricate web of recovered data connections that looked almost organic in its complexity. "Did it work?" Evan asked, voice rough from too little sleep. 94% recovery rate on critical systems, Robert said. "Better than we had any right to expect. The client's core engineering data, project management systems, financial tracking, all recoverable with high confidence. The 6% we couldn't recover is mostly redundant documentation and archived communications." "That's incredible. That's desperation meeting competence. The team worked miracles last night." Robert gestured toward the conference room where Lucas had appeared, looking impeccable in a fresh suit despite the hour. "Now comes the hard part. Convincing Jenkins we're not just lucky, we're competent." Evan drained half the coffee in one long swallow. "What do you need me to do?" "Stay visible but quiet. Miranda wants you in the call as a symbol of the collaborative effort, but Lucas will be doing most of the talking. Your job is to look like you belong there and answer honestly if Jenkins asks you direct questions." "What kind of questions?" "The kind that expose whether we actually know what went wrong or we're just improvising recovery theater." Robert's phone buzzed. "That's Miranda. Conference room now. Everyone." They filed into the war room that had become ground zero for the crisis. Miranda sat at the head of the table, looking like she'd slept even less than Evan, but somehow made it look authoritative. Peterson occupied his usual position, tablet out, expression carefully neutral. Lucas took the opposite end of the table from Miranda, his team, minus Evan, flanking him like bodyguards. "Status," Miranda said without preamble. Lucas stood, commanding the room with practiced ease. "We've successfully recovered 94% of the Atlas engineering data using a distributed dependency analysis approach. The remaining 6% is non-critical. We've identified the root cause as a validation server bottleneck that cascaded into system-wide failures during a high-volume data migration event." "Can it happen again?" Miranda asked. "Not with the architecture changes we're implementing. We're distributing the validation process across multiple servers, implementing priority queuing for critical data, and establishing automated load monitoring that will flag potential bottlenecks before they become critical." "Those are the solutions Diana and Marcus proposed 6 weeks ago," Robert said quietly. "The ones that were deemed operationally naive." Lucas's jaw tightened fractionally. "Context matters, Robert. 6 weeks ago, we were operating under different constraints. The crisis gave us the justification to implement more aggressive changes than the client would have approved under normal circumstances." "So the failure was necessary to fix the underlying problems?" "I'm saying we've turned a crisis into an opportunity for structural improvement." Miranda's expression suggested she wasn't buying the spin, but she let it pass. "How confident are you in this recovery? If Jenkins asks for guarantees, what can we actually promise?" "The data is recoverable," Diana said, speaking up from her position beside Marcus. "We've validated the dependency graphs against known good samples. The accuracy rate is consistent. What we're presenting isn't theoretical, it's demonstrable." "Show me." Diana pulled up the visualization on the room's main screen. The intricate web of connections filled the display, nodes highlighted in different colors to indicate data types and confidence levels. "This is the Atlas Engineering Project database," Diana explained. "Each node represents a data record. The connections show dependencies, which data relies on which other data. The green connections are high confidence recoveries, yellow are medium confidence requiring manual validation, red or low confidence that we've flagged for client review." Miranda studied the display. "I see maybe 2% red. You said 6% was unrecoverable." "The unrecoverable data isn't shown because it has no connections. Standalone records that don't integrate with anything else, mostly archived emails and outdated documentation, nothing that affects operational capability. And you built this overnight. The framework existed in our heads, Marcus said. We just needed the crisis to justify implementing it. Miranda's gaze shifted to Evan, and he felt the weight of her attention like a physical force. Mr. Cole, you've been quiet. What's your assessment? Every eye in the room turned toward him. Evan set down his coffee cup, buying a moment to organize his thoughts. The recovery works, he said carefully. The team built something elegant under impossible pressure, but the underlying problem isn't just technical, it's cultural. We're presenting this as a success story, but it's really a story about warnings that weren't heeded until disaster forced action. Lucas's expression went cold. That's an oversimplification that ignores— Let him finish, Miranda interrupted. Evan met her eyes. Jenkins isn't going to care about our internal dynamics. He's going to care whether we learned from this failure, whether we have systems in place to prevent it from happening again, and whether those systems are better than whatever our competitors are offering. And do we? Miranda asked. Ask me in 6 months. Right now we have a recovery plan and some architectural improvements. Whether we've actually changed how we work, how we listen to warnings, how we balance timeline pressure against sustainability, how we reward people for identifying problems before they become disasters, that's what determines if this happens again. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Peterson looked thoughtful. Robert wore a slight smile. Lucas looked like he wanted to throw Evan out a window. Diana and Marcus carefully studied their notes. Miranda checked her watch. The call starts in 45 minutes. Lucas, you present the technical recovery. Diana and Marcus, you're on backup for detailed questions. Robert, you handle the architectural improvements and preventive measures. Peterson and I will manage the client relationship and contract discussion. She looked at Evan. You observe unless directly addressed. If Jenkins asks you something, answer honestly and concisely. Don't volunteer information, but don't dodge questions either. Understood. One more thing. Miranda's voice sharpened. This call is about recovery and accountability, not blame and excuses. If Jenkins asks what went wrong, we acknowledge the validation server bottleneck. We acknowledge we should have acted on earlier warnings, and we present our solutions. We do not blame the client, we do not deflect responsibility, and we do not make excuses. Clear? Lucas nodded stiffly. Clear. Good. Everyone take 30 minutes to review, rehearse, and make yourselves presentable. This video call determines whether we keep a $200 million contract or become a cautionary tale about consulting firms that couldn't consult their way out of their own failures. The meeting broke. Evan found himself in a restroom that was nicer than his entire apartment, trying to make his discount blazer look less slept in and his face look less like he'd spent the night staring at computer screens. The mirror reflected someone who didn't quite belong. Cheaper clothes, rougher edges, visible exhaustion that no amount of cold water could entirely hide. Marcus appeared beside him, running wet hands through his hair. You didn't have to say that. About the cultural problems. Was I wrong? No, but there's being right and there's being politically smart. What you did was the former without the latter. I'm not good at politics. I've noticed. Marcus dried his hands on paper towels that probably cost more per sheet than Evan's toilet paper at home. For what it's worth, I agreed with everything you said. So did Diana. Robert definitely did. But saying it in front of Miranda and Lucas right before a critical client call, that took either courage or stupidity. Probably stupidity. Probably both. Marcus headed for the door, then paused. Lucas is going to make you pay for that. Maybe not today, but eventually. He doesn't forgive people who make him look bad in front of executives. I didn't make him look bad. I just stated facts. In his world, those are the same thing. Evan returned to the conference room to find it transformed into a video call stage. Cameras had been positioned to capture the table with Miranda at the center, flanked by Peterson and Lucas. The support team, Diana, Marcus, Robert, and Evan, would be visible but secondary, arranged behind the principals like a technical chorus. The main screen showed a waiting room interface. At exactly 9 o'clock, it dissolved into a conference room that made Astron's setup look modest. James Jenkins sat at the center of a table that could have seated 20, surrounded by executives whose titles Evan could only guess at. Jenkins himself was 60-something, silver-haired, with the particular hardness of someone who'd built an empire and wouldn't tolerate threats to it. "Miranda," Jenkins said without preamble, "tell me why I shouldn't fire Asteron and sue you for the $20 million your failure just cost me." Miranda didn't flinch. "Because we've recovered 94% of your data, identified the exact failure point, and implemented architectural changes that make this specific failure impossible to repeat. Because suing us would take years and cost you more in legal fees than you'd recover. And because our competitors can't match the integration depth we've already achieved, which means starting over would cost you more than fixing what we built." Jenkins's expression didn't soften. "That's a business argument. I want a technical explanation. What the hell happened?" Lucas leaned forward. "The system experienced a cascading failure triggered by a validation server bottleneck during your quarterly engineering data upload. The validation architecture was designed to handle normal operational loads, but couldn't scale efficiently when transaction volume spiked. This created a data backlog that exceeded timeout thresholds across multiple integration points simultaneously." "In English," Jenkins demanded. "A traffic jam," Evan said, then immediately regretted speaking without being asked. But Jenkins's attention locked onto him, and there was no taking it back. "Your data was flowing through our system fine until too much arrived at once. The checkpoint that validates data correctness became a bottleneck. Everything backed up behind it until the system started timing out and losing track of what was waiting where." "And who are you?" "Evan Cole, junior consultant. He identified the bottleneck," Robert interrupted smoothly. "Fresh eyes on the problem led to the recovery approach we implemented." Jenkins studied Evan through the screen. "You don't look like the typical Astron consultant." "I'm not, sir. Started 3 days ago. Before that, I was in warehouse operations." "Warehouse operations." Jenkins' laugh was sharp. "So Miranda hired someone from a warehouse to fix a $20 million disaster created by consultants with fancy degrees. That's either brilliant or desperate." "Both," Miranda said. "But it worked. Diana, show him the recovery visualization." Diana pulled up the dependency graph. Jenkins's team leaned forward, and Evan saw several of them making notes. "This is your recovered data," Diana explained. "The green connections represent validated relationships between data points. We've successfully reconstructed the logical structure even though the temporal sequence was compromised. Your engineering projects, financial data, resource allocations, all recoverable with high confidence." One of Jenkins' team members, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes, spoke up. "What about data integrity? How do we know the relationships your system identified are correct?" "We validated against known good samples," Marcus said. "Took projects we know are complete and correct, ran them through the recovery algorithm, compared the results to the originals. The accuracy rate was 97%. The 3% variance was in optional metadata, not critical engineering data." "Show me an example," Jenkins demanded. Marcus pulled up a specific project, a bridge design from 18 months ago. The screen split to show the original data structure alongside the recovered version. They were nearly identical. "The recovered version is missing some archived email communications and a few outdated design iterations," Marcus explained. "But the final engineering specifications, structural calculations, safety certifications, all intact and verified." Jenkins's hardened expression cracked slightly. "That's actually impressive." "The recovery is impressive," Miranda agreed. "But James, you deserve an honest accounting of how we got here. We had warnings about the validation server becoming a bottleneck. Our team raised concerns. Those concerns were documented but not acted upon quickly enough." "Why not?" Lucas started to answer, but Miranda cut him off with a look. "Because we prioritized timeline over sustainability. Because we made judgment calls that proved incorrect. Because we believed the theoretical system capacity was sufficient without stress testing under realistic conditions." "That's a polite way of saying you screwed up," Jenkins said. "Yes, we screwed up, not because we're incompetent, but because we made the wrong calls when balancing competing priorities. And we're fixing it, not just the technical architecture, but the decision-making processes that led to the failure." Peterson pulled up a presentation showing the architectural changes. We're implementing distributed validation across multiple servers, priority queuing for critical data, automated load monitoring with early warning systems, and a formal protocol for escalating technical concerns that can't be dismissed by timeline pressure. Those are the solutions we should have implemented 6 weeks ago, Robert added. We're not pretending this failure was unforeseeable. It was foreseeable. People on our team foresaw it. We're changing our systems to ensure that foresight gets acted on rather than documented and ignored. The honesty seemed to catch Jenkins off guard. He exchanged glances with his executive team, silent communication passing between them. Let me be clear, Jenkins finally said. This failure cost us, not just money, but credibility with our own clients. Projects are delayed because we can't access data. Engineering teams are working from reconstructed specifications instead of verified records. The damage extends beyond your $20 million price tag. We understand, Miranda said, and we're prepared to offer compensation beyond the standard contract terms. Extended support at no additional cost, priority access to our senior technical team, and a service-level agreement with financial penalties if we fail to meet response times. That's a start, but I want more than financial compensation. I want to guarantee this won't happen again. I can't give you that guarantee, Miranda said, and Evan saw Lucas wince. No one can guarantee perfect system performance, but I can guarantee that we've learned from this failure, that we're implementing structural changes to prevent this specific scenario, and that we're building feedback systems to identify future problems before they become critical. Jenkins leaned back in his chair, studying the assembled Asteron team through the camera. His gaze lingered on Evan. Mr. Cole, Jenkins said, the warehouse guy. You're new to this world, so you probably haven't learned to bullshit yet. Tell me straight. Should I trust Asteron to finish this project? Every muscle in Evan's body tensed. He felt Miranda's attention, Lucas's barely concealed hostility, Robert's steady presence. The question wasn't really about trust. It was a test of whether Asteron could be honest when honesty hurt. 3 days ago, I would have said no, Evan answered. Because 3 days ago, this was a company that valued credentials over competence, polish over problem solving. A company where talented people like Diana and Marcus raised concerns that got documented and ignored. Where the appearance of success mattered more than sustainable solutions. Lucas's face went red. Peterson looked alarmed. Miranda remained utterly still, expression unreadable. But something changed in the last 72 hours, Evan continued. People started listening, not because the hierarchy shifted or policies changed, but because failure forced honesty. Diana's warnings about the validation server weren't theoretical anymore. They were vindicated. Marcus's concerns about technical debt weren't pessimism. They were prophecy. And when we built the recovery solution, it wasn't one person's brilliant idea. It was collaborative work where the best solution won regardless of who proposed it. That's a very political answer, Jenkins observed. That's an honest answer. You asked if you should trust Asteron. I think you should trust this team, the people who saw the problems coming and are now fixing them. Whether the broader company culture changes, whether these lessons stick beyond this crisis, ask me in 6 months. Right now, I trust the people in this room to deliver what they're promising. Whether that's enough for you, I can't say. The silence that followed felt like falling. Evan had either just saved the contract or destroyed it, and he had no idea which. Jenkins smiled. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't hostile either. That's the first genuine answer I've heard from a consultant in 20 years. Most of you are trained to say what clients want to hear. You just told me what I needed to hear. He looked at Miranda. Here's my decision. We're continuing the contract, but with modifications. The recovery work you've done earns you another chance, but I want Mr. Cole's team, Diana, Marcus, Robert, and apparently our warehouse philosopher, to have direct authority over technical decisions. Lucas, you can coordinate, but you don't override their calls without my explicit approval. Lucas's face went from red to white. That's unprecedented. I'm the technical lead. And you led us into a $20 million failure, Jenkins interrupted. I'm not firing you because Miranda's right. You have expertise we need, but your judgment is now conditional, not absolute. Accept those terms, or I'll find another consulting firm that will. Miranda didn't hesitate. We accept. Good. I want weekly progress reports, not from Lucas, but from the implementation team. I want direct access to Diana and Marcus for technical questions. And I want Mr. Cole to continue whatever fresh perspective he's bringing, because apparently warehouse operations taught him something Stanford didn't. The call ended. The screen went dark. No one in the conference room moved. Then Lucas stood, chair scraping hard against the floor. This is unacceptable. You just let a client dictate our internal technical hierarchy based on the opinion of someone who's been here 3 days. I let a client save a contract we nearly lost, Miranda corrected, and he didn't dictate anything. He set conditions for continuing a relationship we damaged. If you don't like those conditions, you're free to resign. You can't be serious. Completely serious. You're brilliant, Lucas, but brilliance without accountability is dangerous. Jenkins just installed accountability. You can work within it, or you can leave. Lucas looked around the room, perhaps expecting support. He found only careful, neutral expressions, except from Evan, who met his gaze without flinching. This isn't over, Lucas said quietly. No, Miranda agreed. It's not. You have work to do implementing the architectural changes you presented. The team needs your expertise, but they don't need your ego. Figure out which one you're bringing to work. Lucas left without another word. The door closing behind him felt final. Peterson was the first to speak. That was either the best client management I've ever seen or the worst. We won't know which until we see if Lucas can actually work under these conditions. He'll work or he'll leave, Miranda said. Either outcome is acceptable. She looked at Evan. That was a hell of a gamble, telling Jenkins we weren't trustworthy 3 days ago. You told me to answer honestly. I did, and you did, which either makes you very brave or very stupid. Someone already told me it's probably both. Miranda almost smiled. Robert, you're now the official technical lead for Atlas implementation. Diana and Marcus report to you. Lucas coordinates but doesn't override. Mr. Cole, you're officially promoted from junior consultant to associate consultant with a 20% salary increase. I haven't even received my first paycheck yet. Then you'll be pleasantly surprised when it arrives. Consider it combat pay for surviving your first week. Miranda gathered her materials. Everyone take the rest of the day off. You've earned it. We restart Atlas implementation tomorrow with new structure and, hopefully, new wisdom. The team filed out gradually. Diana hugged Marcus, both of them looking relieved and exhausted. Robert clapped Evan on the shoulder. You just made an enemy and an ally in the same morning. That might be a record. Which is which? Lucas is the enemy. Jenkins is the ally, assuming you can keep delivering honesty with competence. Both relationships will define your career here. Evan collected his things, just the blazer he'd arrived in and a visitor badge that would need to be replaced with a permanent one. As he headed for the elevator, Miranda appeared beside him. Walk with me, she said. They rode the elevator down in silence, emerged into a lobby that looked different in morning light, and stepped outside into air that felt impossibly fresh after hours in recycled atmosphere. You could have lied to Jenkins, Miranda said. Given him the polished answer he was expecting, would have been safer. I'm not good at lying, and he seemed like someone who'd see through it anyway. He is. So am I. Miranda stopped walking, turned to face him fully. I didn't hire you as a symbol, Mr. Cole. I hired you because Astron has been making the same mistake for years, confusing polish with substance, pedigree with capability, confidence with competence. You represent the correction. But understand what that means. I'm a test case. You're a challenge to everyone who thinks their degree and their suit and their smooth presentations are what make them valuable. Some people will rise to that challenge. Others will try to destroy you for it. Lucas. Lucas is just the most obvious example. There are others, people who've built careers on credentials and connections rather than actual contribution. Your success threatens their narrative. Evan thought about the warehouse, about years of being overlooked and underestimated, about doors that closed based on resume lines instead of actual capability. What if I fail? What if I'm not actually good enough and this was just beginner's luck? Then you fail honestly, which is better than succeeding dishonestly. And you learn, which is what everyone should be doing, but most have forgotten how. Miranda pulled out her phone, typed something quickly. I just sent you access to our professional development budget. Use it. Take courses, attend conferences, learn from people smarter than both of us. The difference between you and Lucas isn't intelligence. It's humility. Don't lose that. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I just made your life significantly more difficult. Lucas is brilliant and vindictive. He'll be looking for any mistake, any flaw, any excuse to prove you don't belong here. And he'll find them, because everyone makes mistakes. So what do I do? What you've been doing. Work hard, listen more than you talk, admit when you're wrong, and keep solving problems instead of protecting yourself. It won't make you popular, but it'll make you valuable. And valuable people survive where popular ones fail. She walked away, leaving Evan standing in the morning sun feeling simultaneously elevated and terrified. He pulled out his phone and called Mrs. Chen. "Evan, how did it go?" "I think I saved my job and made an enemy and got promoted all in the same 2 hours." "That sounds like quite a morning. Mia will want to hear all about it. When are you coming home?" "Now, right now. Is she awake?" "She's eating breakfast. Come share it with her. You sound like you need something normal." Evan caught a bus that smelled like humanity and diesel, rode it across a city that felt different now that he had a place in it, and arrived at Mrs. Chen's apartment to find Mia covered in syrup and delight. "Daddy!" She launched herself at him, sticky hands and all. "Mrs. Chen said you're fixing important computers. Are you famous now?" "Not famous, just employed." "Can we get the good cereal? The one with the prizes inside?" Evan thought about his new salary, about the 20% increase on money he hadn't even received yet, about the professional development budget Miranda had just given him. "Yeah, baby, we can get the good cereal." Mia's joy was uncomplicated and perfect. She didn't care about office politics or technical architectures or the difference between credentials and competence. She cared that her dad had a job and they could afford good cereal. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was everything. Mrs. Chen handed him coffee and a plate of food he hadn't realized he needed. "You look tired." "I haven't really slept in 2 days." "Then eat and then sleep. The computers will still be there tomorrow." She was right, of course. The problems would be there tomorrow. So would Lucas's hostility and the pressure of being a symbol and the constant test of proving he belonged. But so would Diana and Marcus and Robert. So would the work that mattered. So would the chance to build something sustainable instead of just looking good while things failed. Evan ate breakfast with his daughter, walked home through familiar streets that felt less oppressive now that he had somewhere to go tomorrow, and fell into sleep that was deep and dreamless and earned. The door that had slammed shut had become a door that opened onto possibilities he was only beginning to understand. What lay beyond it was uncertain, difficult, and probably dangerous to his pride and his peace. But it was real. It was his. And tomorrow, he'd walk through it again. The sleep lasted 6 hours, which felt like both forever and not nearly enough. Evan woke to afternoon light slanting through his apartment's single window and the sound of Mia playing with blocks in the living room. For a moment, he let himself just lie there, feeling the weight of exhaustion slowly lift, before reality reasserted itself with all its complicated edges. He had a job. A real job with a salary that would actually cover rent and groceries, and maybe even the good cereal without calculating whether they could afford it. But he also had Lucas Brandt actively wanting him to fail, a client who expected him to deliver wisdom he wasn't sure he possessed, and a team that had just been restructured around his unproven presence. His phone showed 17 missed messages. Most were from Marcus and Diana, coordinating the restart of Atlas implementation. 2 were from HR with onboarding documents. 1 was from a number he didn't recognize. He opened that one first. "Mr. Cole, this is Lucas Brandt. We should talk privately before tomorrow. There are aspects of the Atlas project you need to understand that weren't appropriate to discuss in front of Jenkins. Meet me at Cordova Coffee at 6 p.m. Come alone." Evan stared at the message, trying to decode the intention behind it. Was this an olive branch? A threat? Some kind of strategic maneuver he lacked the political sophistication to identify? He texted back, "I'll be there." The response came immediately. "Good. Don't mention this to Robert or the others. What we discuss concerns team dynamics they don't need to be involved in." That sounded like exactly the kind of thing Evan should mention to Robert. But he also understood that refusing Lucas's invitation would only deepen the hostility, and he needed to at least try to understand the man whose authority he'd accidentally usurped. Mia appeared in the doorway, blocks in hand. "You're awake! Can we build a tower?" "The biggest tower," Evan agreed, pulling himself out of bed. "Taller than this building." "Taller than the whole city!" They spent the afternoon constructing elaborate block towers that defied physics until they didn't, collapsing into giggles and ruins. It was the kind of simple joy Evan had been missing during the warehouse years, when his time with Mia had been fractured into the gaps between shifts. Now, with regular hours and actual weekends, he could imagine being present in her life in ways he'd only dreamed about. At 5:30, he left Mia with Mrs. Chen again, feeling guilty about how much he was relying on her kindness. The coffee shop Lucas had chosen was in a neighborhood Evan rarely visited, the kind of place where a cup of coffee cost what he used to spend on lunch, full of people having quiet conversations about things that probably mattered to someone. Lucas was already there, occupying a corner table with 2 cups of coffee already ordered. He looked different outside the office. Still polished, but wearing the casual wealth of expensive jeans and a sweater that probably cost more than Evan's entire wardrobe. He gestured to the empty chair. "Thank you for coming," Lucas said as Evan sat. "I wasn't sure you would. You said we needed to talk." "We do, but first I owe you an acknowledgement." Lucas pushed one of the coffee cups toward Evan. "You were right about the validation server. Diana was right. Marcus was right. I made a judgment call that proved catastrophic, and I let my confidence override legitimate concerns. That's on me." The admission caught Evan off guard. He'd expected hostility or manipulation, not something approaching contrition. "Okay," Evan said carefully, "but here's what you need to understand about how this actually works." Lucas leaned forward, and Evan saw the calculation behind the apparent honesty. In our world, being right isn't enough. Diana and Marcus were right, but they're still junior consultants who will spend years proving themselves before anyone gives them real authority. You were right, and Jenkins handed you influence that typically takes a decade to earn. That's not fair to them, and it's destabilizing to the team structure. "I didn't ask for that influence." "No, but you accepted it. And now you have to navigate the consequences, which include people who resent you for advancing based on one successful insight rather than sustained performance. Are you one of those people?" Lucas smiled, and it looked almost genuine. "I'm someone who recognizes that Miranda is using you to make a point. She's been looking for an excuse to redistribute power away from technical leads like me, and you provided it. The question is whether you're aware of being a chess piece in a larger game." Robert said something similar, that I'm a test case. Robert's not wrong, but he's also not telling you the full story because he's invested in you succeeding. I'm not, which means I can be honest about what you're actually facing. Evan sipped the coffee. It was excellent, which somehow made him more suspicious. What am I facing? A team that's going to expect you to solve problems you're not qualified to handle. A client who's going to lose patience the moment you make a mistake. And colleagues who are going to watch you very carefully to see if you're actually competent or just lucky. Lucas paused. And me, actively looking for proof that credentials and training matter, that you can't just skip the years of foundational work and succeed through pattern recognition and fresh eyes. So you want me to fail? I want the system to validate itself. If you succeed despite lacking formal training, it suggests the system is broken. If you fail, it confirms that standards exist for good reasons. Either way, I get clarity. The honesty was almost refreshing in its coldness. Evan set down his coffee cup. "Why are you telling me this? Why not just let me walk into whatever trap you're setting?" "Because I'm not setting a trap. I'm telling you exactly what's going to happen so you can't claim ignorance when it does." Lucas pulled out his phone, swiped through something, then showed Evan the screen. "This is the Atlas implementation timeline. We have 6 months to complete the architectural overhaul, integrate the recovered data, and deliver a system that's more robust than what failed. The technical complexity is significant. Multiple legacy systems, regulatory requirements, client expectations that border on impossible." Evan studied the timeline. Even with his limited experience, he could see the compression points, the places where tasks overlapped in ways that suggested someone would have to work miracles. Who built this timeline? Jenkins's team, with Miranda's approval. It's aggressive but technically achievable if everything goes perfectly, which, as we just learned, nothing ever does. So we're being set up to fail. We're being given an opportunity to prove we learned from the previous failure. If we deliver, the contract renewal is virtually guaranteed. If we don't, Astron loses Atlas and probably 3 other clients who are watching to see how we handle adversity. Lucas took back his phone. And you, as the newly elevated associate consultant with direct client access, are going to be highly visible in either outcome. Evan felt the trap close around him, understanding now what Lucas was actually doing. This wasn't a threat. It was a prediction. Lucas was laying out exactly how Evan's lack of experience would become obvious under sustained pressure, how one moment of insight wouldn't be enough to carry him through 6 months of complex technical work. "You think I can't do this?" Evan said. "I think you're smart and perceptive and genuinely talented at pattern recognition. I also think you lack the foundational knowledge to make sound technical decisions under pressure, and that gap is going to become obvious." Lucas finished his coffee. "But I'm willing to be proven wrong. In fact, I'd prefer to be wrong because your failure makes all of us look bad. So here's my offer." "You're making an offer?" "I'm offering to mentor you. Privately, outside the office dynamics and Robert's oversight. You have natural ability but no formal training. I can provide that training, teach you the architectural principles, the system design patterns, the engineering fundamentals you're missing. In exchange, you stop publicly undermining my technical judgment and start showing some respect for the expertise you don't have." Evan studied Lucas, trying to see past the smooth presentation to the actual motivation. Was this genuine? A power play? Some kind of elaborate setup? "Why would you help me succeed if my success undermines the credential system you believe in?" "Because your success, while properly trained, doesn't undermine anything. It proves that talent plus education equals competence. You succeeding through pure instinct would be threatening. You succeeding because you combined natural ability with proper mentorship validates everything I believe about how this should work." It made a certain logical sense, which made Evan trust it less. But he also recognized the kernel of truth in Lucas's assessment. He did lack foundational knowledge. He was going to face technical challenges he couldn't solve through warehouse experience and pattern recognition, and having someone willing to teach him might be the difference between surviving 6 months and crashing spectacularly. "I need to think about it," Evan said. "Of course, but understand that this offer has a shelf life. Right now I'm willing to help because it serves both our interests. A month from now, when you've made mistakes and lost Jenkins's confidence, my help won't be worth as much. The best time to accept mentorship is before you need it desperately." Lucas stood, leaving cash on the table for both coffees. "One more thing. Robert is a good person and a competent engineer, but he's also Miranda's ally in reshaping Astron's culture, which means he has political motivations for wanting you to succeed. I don't, which makes my assessment of your capabilities more honest than his encouragement. Think about which kind of feedback is actually going to help you survive." He left without waiting for a response. Evan sat alone in the expensive coffee shop, surrounded by people having conversations that probably didn't include existential questions about credentials versus competence, and tried to sort through what had just happened. His phone buzzed. "Marcus, team meeting tomorrow at 8. Robert wants to kick off the Atlas rebuild. You coming?" Evan typed back, "Wouldn't miss it." Another buzz, this time Diana. "Lucas tried to talk to you yet?" He does this, isolated conversations where he positions himself as the reasonable one while everyone else is supposedly playing politics. "Just had coffee with him." "Let me guess. He offered to mentor you while suggesting Robert has ulterior motives?" "How did you know?" "Because he did the same thing to me when I first raised concerns about the validation server. Made it seem like he was the only one who really understood the technical challenges, that everyone else was too focused on politics to see clearly. Took me weeks to realize he was the one playing politics by pretending he wasn't." Evan stared at the message, feeling something shift in his understanding. Lucas's entire presentation had been framed as honest assessment versus political maneuvering, but what if that framing was itself the political move? "What should I do?" Evan texted back. "Trust Robert. Work with the team. Don't let Lucas isolate you from the people who actually have your back. And definitely tell Robert about this conversation. The secrecy is part of the manipulation. Evan left the coffee shop and called Robert instead of texting. Evan, everything okay? Lucas just offered to mentor me privately. Said I shouldn't tell you or the team because it concerns dynamics you don't need to be involved in. Robert laughed, and it sounded tired. Of course he did. Let me guess. He acknowledged being wrong about the validation server, then explained how you're in over your head, then offered to help you while suggesting I have political motivations? Word for word. It's a pattern. Lucas is brilliant at making people feel like he's the only one being honest while everyone else has agendas. The irony is that his agenda is maintaining a technical hierarchy where his judgment is unchallenged. You accepting private mentorship from him recreates that dynamic under different terms. So I shouldn't accept? I can't tell you what to do. But I can tell you that learning from Lucas means learning his way of seeing things, which includes his blind spots. And those blind spots just cost us a $20 million contract. You want that perspective shaping your growth? Evan thought about the validation server, about warnings ignored, about the gap between theoretical capacity and real-world performance. What's the alternative? Learn from everyone. Marcus can teach you data architecture. Diana knows system integration better than anyone. Jennifer and David are experts in recovery and resilience. I can teach you infrastructure and operations. And you bring your own perspective that none of us have. That's collaborative learning, not hierarchical mentorship. That sounds harder. It is. It's also more sustainable. Lucas is offering you a shortcut, fast learning from one expert source. But shortcuts in technical work are how we ended up with Atlas failing in the first place. Evan arrived home to find Mia already asleep, sprawled across her bed with blocks still clutched in one hand. He carefully extracted them, covered her with a blanket, and stood watching her breathe with the particular peace of children who don't yet know how complicated the world gets. He spent the evening reviewing the Atlas documentation, trying to build mental models of the systems he'd be working with. The complexity was daunting. 17 legacy systems, each with its own logic and limitations, all needing to communicate through an integration layer that had to be rebuilt from the ground up. Pattern recognition would help, but Robert was right that it wouldn't be enough. He needed to actually understand the fundamentals, not just recognize when things looked wrong. His phone buzzed again. This time, an unknown number, but the message made his stomach drop. Mr. Cole, this is James Jenkins. I wanted to reach out directly, away from official channels. The honesty you showed in our call impressed me, but I need to know if it was genuine or performance. I've seen consultants play the authentic card before. Prove to me you're different. My direct number is below. Call me this weekend. We should talk about what I'm actually expecting from this rebuild. Evan stared at the message, understanding that he was being tested in ways he hadn't anticipated. Jenkins wanted direct access, wanted to bypass the formal structures and hierarchies. That could be an opportunity or a trap, and Evan had no idea which. He didn't call that night. Instead, he made notes. Questions about the Atlas systems, gaps in his understanding, things he needed to learn before he could make competent decisions. The list grew long enough to be discouraging, but also specific enough to be actionable. Morning came with Mia jumping on his bed, demanding pancakes and stories. Evan made both, letting himself be present in her joy, before facing whatever the team meeting would bring. They ate breakfast together, syrup and laughter mixing in ways that felt like the life he'd been working toward all those warehouse years. At 7:30, he dropped Mia at school, a new routine enabled by actual daytime hours, and headed to Asteron. The building looked different in morning light, less imposing now that he had a badge that actually worked and a desk that was supposedly his. The technical floor was already buzzing. Diana had claimed a conference room and filled it with whiteboards covered in system diagrams. Marcus was setting up multiple monitors, each displaying different aspects of the Atlas architecture. Jennifer and David were arguing amicably about something involving data migration protocols. Robert sat at the center of it all, orchestrating chaos into productivity. Lucas was notably absent. "He's with Miranda," Robert said when Evan asked, discussing his role in the new structure. It's a conversation that should have happened yesterday, but got delayed by everyone being exhausted. Diana pulled Evan toward a whiteboard. "Okay, crash course in what we're actually building. The old Atlas system tried to create a unified intelligence layer, one place where all data from legacy systems came together. The problem was that layer became a single point of failure. The validation server, Evan said. Exactly. So the new architecture distributes that intelligence. Instead of one central brain, we're creating multiple coordination points that can operate independently but sync with each other. Like going from a monarch to a democracy, no single failure point can bring down the whole system. Marcus joined them, pulling up a diagram. Here's the challenge. Each legacy system speaks its own language. They use different data formats, different validation rules, different assumptions about what information means. The old system tried to force them all into one unified format. The new system lets them keep their own formats but provides translation services so they can understand each other. Like the United Nations, Evan said. Everyone speaks their own language, but there are translators available. Perfect analogy, but translators can make mistakes. Languages can be ambiguous, and sometimes things just don't translate cleanly. That's where the complexity comes in. Over the next 3 hours, Evan absorbed more technical information than he'd learned in months of self-study. Diana walked him through data synchronization protocols. Marcus explained distributed consensus algorithms. Jennifer demonstrated resilience patterns for handling failures. David showed him monitoring systems that could predict problems before they became critical. It was overwhelming and exhilarating. Every question Evan asked revealed new layers of complexity, but also new understanding. He started seeing how the pieces fit together, how the theoretical concepts he'd read about manifested in actual system design. Robert appeared at his shoulder during a break. You're keeping up. Barely. Every answer generates 5 more questions. That's how you know you're actually learning. When you stop having questions, you've either mastered the material or given up understanding it. Which happens more often? In most consultants, giving up. They learn enough to sound competent in client meetings and stop there. The ones who actually get good are the ones who stay curious. Lucas arrived just before lunch, expression carefully neutral. He nodded at the assembled team, took a seat at the edge of the group, and said nothing. Evan watched him watch the others, seeing the calculation behind the professional mask. Okay, Robert said, pulling everyone's attention. We've got 6 months to deliver a system that's better than what failed. The timeline is aggressive, but achievable if we work smart. That means early identification of problems, honest assessment of progress, and zero tolerance for hiding issues because they're inconvenient. He looked directly at Lucas. It also means that technical decisions are collaborative. Anyone can propose solutions, anyone can raise concerns, and we evaluate ideas on merit regardless of who suggests them. Clear? Clear, Lucas said. His tone gave nothing away. Good. Diana and Marcus, you're leading the architecture redesign. Jennifer and David, you handle data migration and validation. Evan, you're doing something different. Evan straightened. What? You're our reality check. You don't have the technical expertise to design systems, but you have the pattern recognition to spot when things don't make sense. Your job is to ask stupid questions. I'm good at those. Stupid questions like, why are we doing it this way? And what happens if this fails? And have we actually tested this assumption? The kind of questions experts stop asking because they think they know the answers. You don't know the answers, which makes you valuable. Diana grinned. You're basically getting paid to be annoying. Dream job. There's more, Robert continued. Jenkins gave you direct access for a reason. He wants unfiltered perspective on our progress. That means you're going to have weekly calls with him, reporting on what you're seeing. Not technical details. He has people for that. But honest assessment of whether we're making real progress or just performing competence. The weight of that responsibility settled on Evan like a physical thing. What if I see problems the team doesn't want me to report? Then you report them anyway. That's the job. It won't make you popular, but it'll make you trustworthy. Lucas shifted in his seat. This is highly irregular. Giving someone with Evan's limited experience direct client access without supervision creates significant risk. You're right, Robert agreed. It's risky. But supervised reporting is how we ended up with green status reports while the system was failing. Jenkins wants to know what's actually happening, not what we think he wants to hear. Evan's lack of experience is a feature, not a bug. And if he misinterprets something, reports a problem that's actually expected behavior he doesn't understand, Then we explain it to him and to Jenkins. But that's better than not reporting real problems because we're too expert to recognize them. The meeting continued with task assignments, timeline discussions, and technical debates that sometimes went over Evan's head. But he kept asking questions, kept pushing for clarity, kept refusing to pretend he understood things he didn't. During a break, Lucas approached him in the hallway. "You're enjoying this." "Enjoying what?" "Having authority without expertise, being rewarded for ignorance dressed up as fresh perspective." "I'm enjoying learning," Evan corrected, "and trying to be useful in ways that don't require me to pretend I know more than I do." That humility won't last. Give it a few months of people praising your insights, and you'll start believing you're actually an expert. That's when you'll become dangerous. "Is that what happened to you?" Lucas's expression hardened. "I earned my expertise through years of formal training and practical application. You're being handed influence you didn't earn because Miranda wants to make a political point about credentials. There's a difference." "Maybe, but the validation server still failed regardless of how much expertise designed it. One failure doesn't invalidate an entire approach to professional development. And one success doesn't prove I belong here. I know that. But I'm going to keep trying anyway, and you can either accept that or spend 6 months looking for proof I'm a fraud. Either way, I've got work to do." Evan walked away before Lucas could respond, heart pounding with adrenaline and fear. He'd just directly challenged someone with years of experience and institutional authority, and he had no idea if that was courage or stupidity. Probably both, he thought, and almost laughed. The afternoon was consumed by deep work, reviewing system specifications, building mental models of data flows, and preparing for his first call with Jenkins. Robert had given him a simple framework: report what you see, admit what you don't know, and never sacrifice honesty for comfort. At 5 o'clock, Evan sat alone in a small conference room with his phone and Jenkins's number. He stared at it for a full minute before dialing. Jenkins answered on the second ring. "Mr. Cole, I wondered if you'd actually call." "You told me to." "I tell lots of people to do things. Most find excuses not to. The fact that you're calling tells me something." "What does it tell you?" "That you're either genuinely committed to honesty or very good at performing it. This conversation will help me figure out which. Tell me what you've learned this week." Evan took a breath and chose truth over safety. "I've learned that I'm in way over my head technically. That the complexity of Atlas is beyond anything I've encountered before. That pattern recognition only gets me so far when I don't understand the underlying principles. And that I'm going to make mistakes because I'm learning while doing instead of learning first and doing second. Most consultants would have told me how confident they are, how much progress they're making, how excited they are about the challenge. I am excited. I'm also terrified. Both things are true." Jenkins laughed, and it sounded genuine. "Okay, Mr. Cole, here's what I'm actually looking for. I don't need you to be an expert. I have experts. They're expensive and sometimes wrong. I need you to be a canary in a coal mine. When things start going wrong, canaries die first. They're sensitive to problems experts miss because they're looking at the wrong things. That's your job. Be sensitive to problems and tell me about them before they become catastrophes. Even if I'm wrong? Even if what looks like a problem to me is actually normal? Especially then. I'd rather investigate 10 false alarms than miss one real warning. The Atlas failure happened because people saw warning signs and didn't escalate them. Don't make that mistake. What if the team thinks I'm being paranoid or undermining their work? Then they're missing the point. Your job isn't to make them comfortable. It's to make me informed. Can you do that?" Evan thought about Lucas's offer of mentorship, about the political dynamics Robert had described, about the weight of being a symbol and a test case. "I can try." "Good enough. I'll call you next Friday, same time. Tell me what you're seeing, what concerns you, and what questions you can't get answered. And Mr. Cole, don't let anyone, not Lucas, not Robert, not even Miranda, convince you that loyalty to the team means hiding problems from me. Loyalty means helping us succeed, even when success requires uncomfortable honesty." The call ended. Evan sat in the quiet conference room, feeling the full weight of what he'd just committed to. He wasn't just learning technical skills or proving credentials didn't matter. He was becoming the system's conscience, the voice that would speak uncomfortable truths when everyone else was invested in comfortable lies. It was exactly the kind of responsibility that could end his career before it really started. It was also exactly why Miranda had hired him. He gathered his things and headed home, where Mia would be waiting with stories about her day and questions about his. Where the complications of office politics and technical architectures and competing loyalties could dissolve into the simple clarity of being a father who showed up, who tried hard, who refused to become someone he wouldn't want his daughter to admire. The door hadn't just opened. It had led him into a maze where every turn revealed new challenges and every choice carried consequences he couldn't fully predict. But he was walking through it anyway, one uncertain step at a time, learning as he went. 3 months into the Atlas rebuild, Evan had learned to recognize the particular quality of silence that preceded disaster. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of focused work or the peaceful hush of a problem solved. It was the held-breath silence of people who knew something was wrong but hadn't yet admitted it aloud. The technical floor had that silence now. Evan stood at the edge of the workspace, watching Diana stare at her monitor with the kind of intensity that suggested she was willing the data to be different through sheer force of concentration. Marcus sat beside her, running the same diagnostic tests for the 3rd time, getting the same concerning results. Jennifer and David were in a hushed conference near the coffee station, voices too low to hear but body language screaming trouble. Robert emerged from his office, saw the assembled tension, and his expression shifted from curious to concerned in the space of a heartbeat. Status. Diana didn't look up from her screen. The distributed validation system is showing drift. How much drift? 0.3% across the primary nodes. 0.7% on the secondary systems. That's within acceptable variance, Lucas said from his position near the whiteboards. He'd been increasingly present over the past weeks, hovering at the edges of the team's work, like a ghost haunting his own former authority. The specifications allow for up to 1% drift during the integration phase. The specifications are wrong, Diana said flatly. 0.3% drift compounds. Give it another week and we'll be at 0.6. 2 weeks and we're over the threshold. A month from now, we're looking at data consistency issues that will make the original Atlas failure look simple. Evan moved closer, studying the graphs Diana had pulled up. The drift was small, tiny variations in how different validation nodes were interpreting the same data, but she was right about the compounding. He'd seen the same pattern in warehouse inventory systems, where small discrepancies accumulated into major reconciliation problems. "Show me the trend line," he said. Diana pulled up a projection. The graph showed drift increasing exponentially, crossing the critical threshold in exactly 18 days. "We need to recalibrate," Marcus said. "Shut down the distributed nodes, sync them back to a master reference state, restart with clean baselines." "That's a 3-day process," Lucas objected. "We can't afford 3 days of downtime with the client demo scheduled for next week. Jenkins is expecting to see the new system operational." "He's expecting to see a system that works," Robert corrected. "Not a system that's operational today and failing in 3 weeks. We don't know it will fail. This could be normal settling behavior as the nodes optimize their interpretation algorithms. Premature intervention could disrupt stabilization patterns we don't fully understand." Diana turned to face Lucas directly. "We've been monitoring this for 6 days. The drift is consistent and predictable. It's not settling behavior. It's systematic divergence caused by rounding errors in the validation calculations. If we don't fix it now, we'll be fixing it later under crisis conditions. Or we'll be fixing a problem that would have resolved itself, wasting 3 days we can't recover." Lucas's voice carried the particular edge of someone whose judgment was being questioned again. This is exactly the kind of overcorrection that slows projects down. Not every anomaly is a catastrophe. Evan thought about the validation server, about warnings dismissed, about the gap between theoretical performance and actual behavior. What's the cost of being wrong each way? Everyone looked at him. If Diana's wrong and we recalibrate unnecessarily, we lose 3 days, but the system still works, Evan continued. If Lucas is wrong and we don't recalibrate, we potentially deliver a system to Jenkins that will fail during the demo or shortly after. Which failure is more expensive? The demo isn't for a week, Lucas said. We can monitor the drift, and if it accelerates beyond projections, we recalibrate then. That gives us more data to make an informed decision rather than panicking at the first sign of variance. It also cuts our response time in half if the problem gets worse, Marcus pointed out. 3 days for recalibration means we need to start no later than 4 days before the demo. That's 72 hours from now. Robert pulled out his phone. I'm calling Jenkins. He needs to know about this before we make the call. That's premature, Lucas said sharply. We're discussing internal technical decisions. The client doesn't need to be involved in every variance we encounter. The client needs to be involved in decisions that affect whether his demo succeeds or fails, Robert countered, and he specifically told Evan he wants to know about concerns before they become catastrophes. Lucas's expression went cold. Of course. Evan's special relationship with the client supersedes normal consulting protocols. Why am I not surprised? This isn't about protocols, Evan said quietly. It's about what Jenkins asked me to do. Be a canary. Die first when things go wrong. This looks like things going wrong. This looks like normal system behavior that someone without technical expertise is misinterpreting as a crisis. Diana stood, and her voice carried an anger Evan had never heard from her before. I have technical expertise. So does Marcus. So does Jennifer, who wrote her doctoral thesis on distributed consensus algorithms. We're all telling you this is a problem. At what point do you accept that maybe, just maybe, your judgment isn't infallible? The workspace went silent. Even the hum of the servers seemed to quiet, as if the machines themselves were waiting to see how this would resolve. Lucas stood slowly, gathering his things with deliberate precision. I'm going to assume that outburst is a product of stress rather than insubordination. When you're ready to have a professional discussion about technical trade-offs rather than an emotional reaction to variance within specifications, I'll be available. He walked out. The door closing behind him sounded final. Robert waited until Lucas was gone before speaking. Jennifer, what's your assessment, doctoral expertise and all? Jennifer approached the monitors, studying the drift patterns with the focus of someone who'd spent years thinking about exactly this kind of problem. Diana's right. This is systematic divergence, not random variance. The nodes are interpreting validation rules slightly differently, and those differences are compounding. It's like having multiple clocks that run at slightly different speeds. They start synchronized, but eventually they'll show different times. Can we fix it without full recalibration? Maybe. If we can identify which specific validation rules are causing the divergence, we could patch those rules across all nodes. But that's delicate work. One mistake, and we could make the drift worse. How long would patching take? A day, maybe 2. Less downtime than full recalibration, but higher risk of creating new problems. David joined the conversation. There's a third option. We proceed with the demo as planned, but we're transparent with Jenkins about the drift and our mitigation strategy. Show him we're monitoring it, explain the recalibration plan, demonstrate that we're managing the risk actively rather than hiding it. Robert nodded slowly. Evan, you're calling Jenkins anyway. Present him with the options. Let him decide how much risk he's comfortable with for his own demo. Evan felt the weight of that responsibility settle across his shoulders. 3 months ago, he'd been a warehouse supervisor. Now he was making recommendations to a client about a multi-million-dollar system based on technical assessments he only partially understood. What do you think I should recommend? He asked. I think you should tell him exactly what you see, Robert said. Small drift compounding into potential problems. 3 possible approaches with different risk profiles. And your honest assessment that the team is divided on urgency. Lucas will say I'm undermining his technical judgment. Lucas's technical judgment got us here in the first place. Let him complain. Evan made the call from the same small conference room where he'd first spoken to Jenkins. The client answered with his usual directness. Mr. Cole, this is earlier than our scheduled call. Should I be worried? Maybe. We've got a technical issue that might affect the demo. The team is divided on how urgent it is. Tell me. Evan explained the drift, the 3 approaches, the different risk assessments. He kept his language simple, translating the technical complexity into the kind of patterns Jenkins could evaluate without needing a computer science degree. And what's your read? Jenkins asked when Evan finished. I think Diana and Marcus are right that this needs to be fixed. I think Lucas is right that we don't want to overreact to every variance. But when I weigh the cost of being wrong each way, fixing it early seems safer than waiting to see if it gets worse. Even though fixing it means potentially delaying the demo? The demo doesn't matter if the system fails a week later. You asked me to be a canary. This feels like the air getting thin. Jenkins was quiet for a moment. Here's what we're going to do. Postpone the demo by 1 week. Use that time to do the full recalibration. I want the system stable and proven, not operational, but fragile. Lucas is going to argue that's unnecessary. Lucas can argue with me directly if he wants. But my read on this situation is that he's more invested in being right than in building something sustainable. I've seen that pattern before. It doesn't end well. I'll let Robert know. One more thing, Mr. Cole. How's Lucas treating you? The question caught Evan off guard. What do you mean? I mean, he lost authority because of recommendations you made. He's watching you have influence he thinks you didn't earn. That creates resentment. Is he undermining you? Making your job harder? Evan thought about the coffee shop conversation, about Lucas's constant subtle challenges, about the way he positioned every technical decision as a test of Evan's competence. He's professional, but he's also waiting for me to fail so he can prove credentials matter. And what do you think? Do credentials matter? They matter, but they're not the only thing that matters. Diana has credentials and she saw this problem. Marcus has credentials and he agreed with her. Lucas has credentials and he's wrong. So maybe the credentials enable expertise, but they don't guarantee wisdom. Jenkins laughed. You're getting better at this political stuff. 3 months ago, you would have just said yes or no. Now you're giving me nuanced analysis. I'm learning from people smarter than me. That's the difference between you and Lucas. You know you're learning. He thinks he's already learned everything he needs to know. Tell Robert to proceed with recalibration. I'll send official approval within the hour. The call ended. Evan returned to the workspace to find the team had grown. Miranda stood near Robert, expression unreadable. Lucas had returned, positioned strategically away from Diana and Marcus. The temperature in the room suggested everyone knew a decision was being made. Jenkins approved recalibration, Evan announced. Demo postponed 1 week. He wants the system stable over operational. Lucas's jaw tightened. He approved based on your recommendation. He approved based on the technical assessment I presented, which included input from Diana, Marcus, Jennifer, and David. This wasn't my decision. It was the team's. The team I was leading before you arrived and undermined the authority structure. Lucas. Miranda's voice cut through the building tension like a blade. My office, now. They left together, and Evan felt the collective exhale from everyone remaining. That's going to be ugly, Diana said quietly. That's been building for months, Robert corrected. Better to have it out now than let it fester through the final implementation phase. The team dispersed to begin recalibration preparations. Evan found himself alone with Robert, who was studying him with an expression that suggested assessment. You handled that well, Robert said. I just reported what I saw. You did more than that. You translated technical complexity into risk assessment, presented options without advocating for one over others, and let the client make an informed decision. That's good consulting. Lucas thinks I'm playing politics. Lucas thinks everyone who disagrees with him is playing politics. It's easier than admitting he might be wrong. Robert pulled up a chair. But here's something you need to understand. This isn't just about Atlas anymore. Miranda's using this project as a test case for how Astron operates. If we succeed with a distributed leadership model where technical decisions are collaborative rather than hierarchical, it changes how the entire company works. And if we fail? Then Lucas gets vindicated, Miranda's cultural changes get rolled back, and people like Diana and Marcus go back to being brilliant voices that get documented and ignored. The stakes are higher than one client contract. Evan thought about that weight, about being a symbol and a test case, about how his success or failure would affect people he'd come to respect and value. That's a lot of pressure. Yes, but you're carrying it better than you probably realize. 3 months ago, you were drowning in technical complexity. Now you're synthesizing information from multiple experts, identifying patterns, making recommendations that balance competing concerns. You're becoming what we hoped you could be. I'm still making it up as I go. Welcome to consulting. We're all making it up. The difference is how honestly we admit it. Miranda's office door opened. Lucas emerged alone, face carefully neutral but with something broken behind his eyes. He walked past the technical floor without stopping, heading for the elevators with the particular posture of someone who knew they'd just lost something important. Miranda appeared in the doorway, gesturing for Robert and Evan to join her. Her office was surprisingly modest for a CEO: functional furniture, technical certifications on the walls, and a whiteboard covered in what looked like organizational charts. "Lucas is taking a leave of absence," Miranda said without preamble. "Effective immediately. He'll be reassigned to a different project when he returns, but he's off Atlas." "What happened?" Robert asked. "He gave me an ultimatum. Either I restructure the team to restore his technical authority, or he leaves Astron. I chose option 3. Remove him from the project but keep him with the company. He's too talented to lose, but he's also too rigid to work in the collaborative model we're building." "How did he take it?" "About as well as you'd expect. He thinks I'm destroying Astron's technical standards to make a political point. He's wrong, but he believes it deeply enough that no argument would change his mind." Miranda turned to Evan. "This is partially because of you. Your success challenges everything Lucas built his career on. He can't reconcile your competence with your lack of credentials, so he's decided you must be a fraud or the system must be broken. Rather than question his assumptions, he's doubling down on them." "I didn't mean to—" "I know, but intent doesn't change impact. Lucas's leave creates opportunity and risk. The opportunity is that the team can work without his constant undermining. The risk is that if Atlas fails now, everyone will blame it on his absence. We lose the benefit of his expertise while carrying the burden of his predictions about failure." "So we can't fail," Evan said. "You were never allowed to fail. But now the stakes are explicit rather than implicit. This project determines whether Astron becomes a company that values collaborative intelligence over hierarchical expertise. Whether we reward people for contribution rather than credentials. Whether we build sustainable solutions rather than impressive failures." She pulled up a project timeline on her computer. "You have 8 weeks to final delivery. The recalibration will take 3 days. That leaves 5 weeks for final integration, testing, validation, and client training. The margin for error is gone. Every decision matters. Every problem needs to be caught early. Every risk needs to be managed actively." "We can do this," Robert said. "I know you can. The question is whether you will. Whether the collaborative model works under sustained pressure. Whether Evan's pattern recognition remains valuable when everyone's exhausted and desperate. Whether Diana and Marcus can lead without Lucas's expertise as backup. Whether this whole experiment proves I was right to bet on people over pedigrees." Evan felt the full weight of that responsibility. He wasn't just proving himself anymore. He was proving that someone like him could belong in this world, that the door he'd walked through should stay open for others who didn't fit the traditional mold. "I won't let you down," he said. "I'm not worried about me," Miranda replied. "I'm worried about you, because if this fails, Lucas gets to say, 'I told you so,' and every barrier we've worked to dismantle gets rebuilt stronger than before. The pressure of that could break people who aren't ready for it." "Then I'll get ready." Miranda almost smiled. "You already are. Now prove it." The recalibration took exactly 3 days, just as Marcus had predicted. Evan spent those days learning the deep technical details he'd been skating over, asking questions that revealed gaps in his understanding, building the foundational knowledge that would let him make better assessments going forward. Diana taught him about consensus algorithms and why distributed systems needed careful coordination. Marcus explained data synchronization protocols and the mathematics of ensuring consistency. Jennifer walked him through failure modes and recovery strategies. David showed him monitoring systems and how to read the patterns that preceded problems. It was intensive, exhausting, and exactly what Evan needed. He filled notebooks with diagrams and explanations, stayed late reviewing documentation, and slowly built mental models that connected the pieces he'd been seeing in isolation. On the 4th day, the recalibrated system came online. The drift was gone. The validation nodes synchronized perfectly, their interpretations aligned within tolerances so tight they were barely measurable. The graphs showed clean, consistent data flowing through the distributed architecture exactly as designed. It's beautiful, Diana said, watching the monitors with the particular satisfaction of someone who'd been proven right at significant personal cost. It's stable, Marcus corrected. Beautiful is when it stays this way under load. They stress tested for a week. Threw more data at the system than Atlas Engineering would ever generate. Simulated failures and watched the system recover gracefully. Pushed the validation nodes to their limits and confirmed they maintained synchronization even under extreme conditions. The system held. More than held, it exceeded specifications, handling loads the old architecture would have choked on, recovering from failures that would have cascaded into catastrophe. Evan reported progress to Jenkins weekly, each call building the client's confidence that this time the solution would last. "You sound different," Jenkins observed during the 6th-week call. "More certain, less like you're making it up as you go." "I'm still making it up," Evan admitted, "but I understand more of what I'm making up now. I can see how the pieces fit together instead of just recognizing when they don't." "That's called expertise, Mr. Cole. You're developing it in real time, which most people never do because they learn in classrooms instead of under fire. How's the team functioning without Lucas?" "Better than I expected. Diana's leading the technical implementation and she's brilliant at it. Marcus keeps everyone grounded in practical reality. Jennifer and David handle all the resilience and recovery planning. Robert orchestrates everything without micromanaging. And you?" "I ask stupid questions and make sure we're building something that will actually work instead of something that looks impressive in demonstrations." "Still playing canary. Still dying first so everyone else stays safe," Jenkins laughed. "I'm moving up the demo. 2 weeks from now instead of 3. I want to show the board what we've built before they start questioning whether the contract extension is worth it. We'll be ready." "I know you will, and Mr. Cole, when this succeeds, not if when, I'm going to have a conversation with Miranda about poaching you for my team. Someone who can translate technical complexity into honest risk assessment is worth their weight in gold." The call ended before Evan could respond. He sat in the conference room, processing the idea that he'd gone from warehouse supervisor to valuable enough to poach in 6 months. It felt surreal, like watching someone else's life unfold. Diana found him there 20 minutes later. "You okay? You look shell-shocked." "Jenkins just said he might try to hire me away from Astron when this is done." "Of course he did. You're exactly what he needs, someone who'll tell him the truth instead of what he wants to hear. That's rare enough to pay for." She sat down across from him. "But here's the thing. You're also what we need. What I need. Having someone on the team who questions assumptions without ego, who admits ignorance without shame, who learns fast and shares generously. That makes everyone better. I'm not that special. You're special enough that Lucas couldn't handle working with you. That says something. It says I'm a threat to people who think credentials define competence. It says you're living proof that there's another way to build expertise, and that scares people who've invested their entire identity in the traditional path." Diana pulled up something on her tablet. "I want to show you something." The screen displayed an organizational chart, Astron structure, but with proposed changes highlighted in green. Diana's name appeared in a position labeled Technical Lead, Architecture Division. Marcus was listed as Technical Lead, Integration Systems. Evan's name appeared in a new role that hadn't existed before, Consulting Director, Client Intelligence and Risk Assessment. "Miranda's reorganization proposal," Diana explained. "If Atlas succeeds, this is what Astron becomes. Distributed leadership, specialized expertise, collaborative decision-making. Lucas's hierarchical model replaced with something more sustainable. And if Atlas fails? Then this proposal gets filed away and we go back to the old way. Credentials and hierarchy and the same patterns that led to the validation server failure in the first place." Evan studied the chart, seeing how the structure Miranda envisioned would change everything about how the company operated. "That's a lot riding on one project." "Oh, welcome to being the inflection point. How you handle the next 2 weeks determines not just your future, but the future of everyone who doesn't fit the traditional consulting mold." The demo day arrived with the particular clarity of high stakes and no margin for error. Atlas Engineering's executive team filled their conference room, Jenkins at the center, flanked by the same hard-eyed executives who'd watched Evan explain the original failure 6 months ago. Miranda led the Astron team with Robert and Evan flanking her. Diana and Marcus were on standby, ready to handle any technical questions that emerged. Lucas was notably absent. His leave had extended into a permanent reassignment, though he remained with Astron in a senior technical role that kept him far from client-facing work. "Before we begin the demonstration," Miranda said, "I want to acknowledge what happened 6 months ago. We failed you. The system we built collapsed under conditions we should have anticipated. People on our team saw the problems coming and weren't heard. That failure was systemic, cultural, and entirely preventable." Jenkins leaned back in his chair. "That's quite an admission." "It's the truth, and the truth is that rebuilding Atlas required rebuilding how we work. We restructured our team to ensure technical concerns can't be dismissed by timeline pressure. We implemented monitoring systems that identify drift before it becomes critical. We built resilience into every layer instead of treating it as an afterthought. And we empowered people like Diana Chen to lead implementation because they've proven they see problems others miss." "Show me," Jenkins said. Diana stepped forward, and for the next hour she walked the Atlas team through the new system. Not with slides and theoretical diagrams, but with live demonstrations. Real data flowing through the distributed architecture. Simulated failures that the system recovered from automatically. Validation nodes. Maintaining perfect synchronization under loads that would have crashed the old system. Evan watched Jenkins's team as Diana worked, saw their expressions shift from skeptical to impressed to something approaching satisfaction. This wasn't a performance, it was proof. "What about sustainability?" one of Jenkins's executives asked. "The old system worked fine initially. How do we know this one won't degrade over time?" Marcus fielded that question, pulling up monitoring dashboards that showed 6 weeks of stable operation under stress conditions exceeding projected real-world usage. "We've built early warning systems that will flag drift, capacity issues, synchronization problems, anything that could compound into failure. The system monitors itself and reports anomalies before they become critical." "And who monitors the monitors?" another executive challenged. "I do," Evan said. "My job is to watch for patterns that suggest problems the automated systems might miss, to ask whether we're seeing normal variants or the early stages of failure, to ensure that concerns get escalated instead of dismissed." "And you're qualified for this because?" "Because I'm not. I'm not a systems architect or a validation expert or a distributed computing specialist. I'm someone who looks at data and asks if it makes sense. Sometimes expertise is what you need. Sometimes fresh eyes catch things experts normalize. We need both." Jenkins stood, moving to the monitor displaying the system's performance metrics. "I've been in this business 40 years. I've seen a lot of consulting firms promise sustainable solutions. Most deliver impressive demonstrations that fail slowly. You're telling me this one is different because you've changed how you work, not just what you built." "Yes," Miranda said. "The technical architecture is solid. But architecture without accountability is just expensive failure waiting to happen. We've built both." "Prove it," Jenkins said. "I want you to run a final stress test. Right now, live, in front of my team. Push the system to failure and show me how it recovers. If it recovers gracefully, the contract extension is approved. If it fails catastrophically, we're done." The room went silent. Diana and Marcus exchanged glances. Robert's expression suggested he was calculating risks. Miranda showed nothing. "Do it," Miranda said. Diana pulled up the stress test controls. "This is going to be aggressive. We're going to simulate simultaneous failures across 3 of the 5 validation nodes, flood the remaining nodes with data volume at 3 times peak load, and introduce random corruption in the data stream to test error detection. That's beyond anything we'd encounter in reality," one of Jenkins's team members objected. "Exactly," Jenkins said. "I want to see what breaks and how. Show me." Diana initiated the test. The monitors lit up with warnings as the simulated failures cascaded through the system. Data flow diagrams turned yellow, then red. Error messages scrolled past. The system strained under impossible conditions. And then it stabilized. The remaining validation nodes coordinated smoothly, distributing the load. The error detection caught and quarantined corrupted data. The monitoring systems flagged the failures and initiated automated recovery protocols. Within 90 seconds, failed nodes were coming back online. Within 3 minutes, the system had returned to normal operation with zero data loss. The Atlas engineering team stared at the monitors in silence. Again, Jenkins said, different failure pattern. They ran the test 4 more times with progressively more catastrophic failure scenarios. The system handled all of them, recovering gracefully, maintaining data integrity, proving that the architecture could withstand conditions that would never occur in reality. Okay, Jenkins finally said. I'm convinced. The contract extension is approved. $200 million over 3 years, with escalation clauses if you maintain the service levels you just demonstrated. Miranda shook his hand. We'll exceed them. I believe you will. Mr. Cole, a moment? Evan followed Jenkins into a private office while the team celebrated in the conference room. The client closed the door and leaned against his desk. I'm still interested in hiring you, Jenkins said directly. I can offer you a significant salary increase, better benefits, and a role where you'd be doing exactly what you did today, translating technical complexity into strategic decisions. Evan had known this was coming, but hadn't prepared an answer. That's generous. It's pragmatic. People like you, people who can bridge the gap between expertise and honesty, are rare. I want that capability in-house. Can I think about it? Of course. But understand what you'd be walking away from if you stay at Astron. You've been useful as a disruptor, as the fresh perspective that challenged their comfortable assumptions. But organizations absorb disruptors. Give it a year and you'll be part of the system you're currently questioning. The edge that makes you valuable will get dulled by familiarity and politics, and the need to get along. Maybe. But the people at Astron, Diana, Marcus, Robert, they're building something different. A company where people like me can belong without becoming what we weren't. That's worth protecting. So you're staying? I think so. But thank you for the offer. It means more than you probably realize. Jenkins smiled. Then take this as advice from someone who's been doing this longer than you've been alive. The moment you stop being uncomfortable, the moment you start feeling like you fit perfectly, that's when you've lost what made you valuable. Stay uncomfortable, keep questioning, keep being the canary even when people get tired of hearing you die. Evan returned to the Astron team to find them already planning the implementation rollout. Diana was sketching timelines, Marcus was coordinating with Atlas Engineering's technical staff, Robert was managing resource allocation. Miranda caught his eye and gestured him into the hallway. Jenkins made you an offer, she said. It wasn't a question. He did. I'm not taking it. Why not? Because what we're building here matters more than a bigger salary. You're creating a place where people who don't fit the traditional mold can actually contribute. That's rare enough to protect. Miranda studied him for a long moment. The organizational restructuring I proposed is being approved. You'll be consulting director for client intelligence and risk assessment. It's a senior position with significant autonomy, but it's also a target. Every person who resents what you represent will be watching for you to fail, to prove that credentials matter and shortcuts don't work. I know. And you're ready for that? Evan thought about the warehouse, about the years of being overlooked, about the door that had slammed shut and then exploded open. I've been getting ready my whole life. I just didn't know it until now. Then welcome to senior leadership. Try not to let it go to your head. The implementation rollout took 4 weeks of intensive coordination. Evan spent those weeks doing exactly what Jenkins had described, translating technical complexity into strategic guidance, identifying risks before they became critical, ensuring that the client understood not just what was being built, but why it would last. He also spent time with Mia, taking her to parks and playgrounds, reading stories before bed, being present in her life in ways the warehouse years had made impossible. She didn't understand what her father did for work, but she understood that he was happy now, that the weight he'd carried for years had lifted. On the final day of implementation, when the last system went live and the monitoring confirmed everything was running perfectly, Diana found Evan in the break room. We did it, she said simply. You did it. I just watched and asked questions. You did more than that. You made it safe to raise concerns. You validated our expertise when Lucas was dismissing it. You showed Miranda that collaborative leadership works. None of this happens without you. None of this happens without all of us. That's the point, isn't it? No single genius solving everything, just competent people working together and listening when someone sees a problem. Diana raised her coffee cup. To competent people listening, may it become the norm instead of the exception. That evening, Evan took Mia out for ice cream. 3 scoops each, the good kind from the place that charged extra but was worth it. They sat in the park as the sun set, sticky and happy, watching other families enjoy the last warm evening of autumn. "Daddy?" Mia asked between bites of chocolate chip. "Yeah, baby? Are you important now?" The question caught him off guard. "What makes you ask that?" "Mrs. Chen said you have an important job helping important people. Does that make you important?" Evan thought about how to answer, about the difference between being important and doing important work, about the lessons he wanted his daughter to learn. "I think helping people is important," he finally said, "and I get to help people solve problems. But that doesn't make me more important than anyone else. It just means I'm useful in a specific way." "Like how I'm useful at cleaning up my toys?" "Exactly like that. Everyone's useful in different ways. The trick is finding the way that fits you and doing it as well as you can." "I'm good at cleaning up toys." "You're great at it, and one day you'll find other things you're great at, and you'll do those too." They finished their ice cream as the park lights came on, casting everything in warm golden glow. Mia chattered about school and friends and the infinite concerns of a 6-year-old whose biggest worry was whether she'd get to be line leader tomorrow. Evan's phone buzzed. A message from Miranda. "Board approved the restructuring. Your new title is official Monday. Congratulations, Director Cole." Another message, this one from Robert. "Drinks tomorrow to celebrate? Team's choice, the fancy place or the dive bar where we can actually afford more than one round." And finally, one from Diana. "Lucas sent his congratulations. Apparently his new project is going well, and he's learning to appreciate collaborative leadership. Miracles do happen." Evan pocketed his phone and focused on his daughter, on the simple, perfect moment of being exactly where he was supposed to be. The door that had slammed shut 6 months ago had led him here, to meaningful work, to people who valued contribution over credentials, to a future that looked nothing like what he'd imagined but felt exactly right. He hadn't won by being the smartest person in the room. He'd won by admitting he wasn't, by learning from people who knew more, by asking questions instead of pretending to have answers, by choosing honesty over safety every time the choice appeared. The validation server had failed because warnings were ignored. The rebuild had succeeded because warnings were heard. That simple difference between silencing concerns and elevating them had changed everything. Mia finished her ice cream and demanded to be pushed on the swings. Evan obliged, watching her arc higher and higher, fearless and joyful. She didn't know yet about credentials or hierarchies or the barriers that told some people they didn't belong. She just knew her father was happy, that they had enough, that tomorrow would come with its own small adventures. That was enough. That was everything. The door that had once defined his limits had become a passage to possibilities he was still discovering. And every day, he walked through it again, learning as he went, failing sometimes and succeeding others, but always moving forward with the kind of honest uncertainty that kept him sharp and humble and valuable. In the end, real expertise wasn't granted by titles or proven by credentials. It was earned by showing up, doing the work, admitting mistakes, and refusing to let fear of failure prevent the attempt. Evan had stopped being afraid of not belonging. He'd learned that belonging wasn't about fitting perfectly into someone else's definition of qualified. It was about bringing your whole self to the work, trusting that your particular combination of experience and perspective mattered, and having the courage to speak up when silence would be safer. The swing arced high, carrying Mia toward the darkening sky, her laughter bright and uncomplicated. Evan pushed again, sending her higher, and felt something settle in his chest. Not satisfaction exactly, but rightness. The sense that after years of searching, he'd finally found the place where his effort mattered and his voice was heard. The door hadn't just opened, it had led him home.